book. It was challenging, the first one.
Because he wanted to be in the place of love.
Somebody came up with the idea.
And he was 100% accurate in his prediction.
Selenium, iodine, or calcium, you don't have to know any of that stuff. All you have to be able to do is chew.
Let's get some cool stuff out of the way here, okay? There we go. This is what we call an e-signal chart. And I'll just go, I talked about, just so I don't repeat anything, how many people took the workshop yesterday? Okay, all right, that's quite a few people, so I'm not going to go over a lot of the same stuff, but you folks that took the workshop yesterday, you mind if I do about 10 minutes of stock market stuff?
You can do more of that.
You guys okay? All right, okay. Here we go, and actually what I'm going to point out here is that better? Actually, let me show you the black, let me show you the dark one first. Just to give you an idea of what's going on with the trends here, as far as what's going on with the markets, this is, let me give you a very quick refresher course or training course in economic theory. When you trade money, what we call arbitrage, okay, or foreign exchange trading, part of what you do in foreign exchange trading, I'm not going to go into this a whole bunch, but part of what you do in foreign exchange trading is that you have a currency like the US dollar, or the pound, or the yen, or the loonie or the toonie in Canada. How can you have respect for their economy when their money's named after cartoon characters? It goes up and down and up and down and up and down. As the currency is going up and down, you then have the currency will spike or hump like a camel at the top, and then you draw a line at the top of it, and that's what you call your resistance line, a ceiling, if you will. At the bottom, it comes down at the bottom, and it sort of bounces off in a steady line, and you average that out, and it's what we call our floor, or our support line. And if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're putting warnings or stops at each one of those so that if it goes down a certain way, it goes down to a certain line. There's chairs up here, sir. It goes down to a certain line, and you sell at a point. And how people make money off the foreign exchange market is that you can focus in on where those lines are going to be, and then if you see the trend between here and here going up, you can place a bet here where, let's say, the euro is at, and in the foreign exchange market, each penny is divided into 100 pips. You guys with me? This is what they're called because they look like pips on the chart. And so what you want to do is that when it goes up, you actually want to bet between the pips where you're going to bet that it's going to go from here to there. So if the euro is going from $1.36 to $1.36. Let's say it goes up 100 pips to $1.37. You bet that here, it then goes up, and then you can sell at the top when it goes to $1.37. You with me on that? Pretty easy stuff. Now, with the stock market, there's another really interesting that we've used, and I've used this ever since 1987. I've done intuitive stuff with the markets as well, and I've worked with some really brilliant what we call pi and sine wave scientists and mathematicians out of Israel who do what we call Fibonacci wave curve testing. And what the Fibonacci wave curve testing is that we took the down spot, which was actually, what was it, 11 years ago? 1987. You guys remember, was it Black Monday, I think it was? October 17th of 1987 was the low point of the market. You guys remember that? When the market tanked? You guys all live in New York. You probably remember. It's like the blackout. Everybody knows where they were when Kennedy was shot, when the market nosedived. So at that time, here's how it works. You take the market down to a particular point. You take it down to where you figure out the low point is. Fibonacci waves or curves look like Nautilus shells. And they look mathematically, they're based on pi, in essence. And so when you go up to 3.14 and all the way out, you actually take it to the bottom, and you can actually then do what we call a golden mean spiral, a Fibonacci wave spiral, out on a chart. And you can actually then predict where the lines of the chart are going to go based on the mathematics from the impact point. Am I totally losing you guys? You understand what I'm saying? Okay, so if it goes to, so for example, if I have something that goes from here, it's easier for me to draw, but because we're so advanced in audiovisual equipment here at the NEWLIFE Expo, I can't even get a flip chart, where they can't bring a whiteboard in. If it starts here, and I know that it's going to cycle out to here, I know that at some point from here that the line of the stock market is going to spike somewhere up to here because that's the intersecting line. Does that make sense? All right. Using this formula, this has allowed me throughout the 1990s, and you can check it on the radio or go back into past newsletters or check it wherever, I predicted that from 87 on we would be seeing a massive bull market in the stock market all through the 90s. Also, this fell into the biblical cycle, that the biblical cycle was we would see 7 fat years of fat cows, if you will, from the dream of Joseph. And this had to do with the ending of the cycle of the United States of America. And please indulge me for just 1 second. This is my own strange, bizarre theory, and I should probably just put aluminum foil on my head before I talk about this, but let me just foist my bizarre opinion of reality upon you. It is my opinion that the United States began not when the Revolutionary War or when the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution was actually signed. Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. Although, I'm sorry, what? What?
There's more signatures. There's enough signatures on the third.
Oh, we got the peanut gallery now. Look out, kids.
I apologize.
So the idea was that what the founding fathers were doing, they were all master masons. They had a very heavy backing in astrology. Specifically, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson knew a lot about astrological charts at the time. The Sibley chart of the United States actually puts the signing of the Declaration of Independence at approximately July 4, 1776. It's somewhere around between 4 and 6 p.m. in the afternoon, because they talk about signing it and then going to dinner at that time. They then set the chart of the United States up in such a way so that the birth of the country would be in Cancer, specifically, and Cancer is the sign of the mother, it's the sign of the mother country, it's the sign of baseball, apple pie, devotion to family. It meant that in the sign of Cancer, the birth sign of the country, that the country itself would act as a mother to all of its children. Does that make sense? So they then put the power of the elections as the first Tuesday in November. And what astrological sign is that?
Scorpio.
Scorpio. What does Scorpio represent mostly? Power, but what else? Death, but also sex, revolution, rebirth. Exactly right. So they took the power of regeneration, sex, death, birth, revolution, put the elections at the first Tuesday in November, so the power of sex, death, revolution, and regeneration would be used when people went to the polls to vote the rascals out. As Thomas Jefferson said, the tree of liberty must be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And he said that a good revolution should happen about every 20 years or so. At the same time, the President of the United States, the president, because all the president, remember, these are all new concepts when they were coming up with it. All the leader was supposed to do was preside over the republic. So the president over the republic then was sworn in, and I think it was originally sworn in April, it's not on Wall Street, it was April 30th, I think, of 1789 was when he was first sworn in, but they then made it the first Monday in March, and that's what the Constitution originally said. So the President of the United States would be sworn in under Pisces. What is Pisces? This is the end of a grand water trine, number one, and the symbol of Pisces is the most, I guess you should call it the most service-oriented sign of the zodiac. When Christ came as the Messiah of the Piscean age, the first thing he did was wash people's feet. He talked about service. He talked about forgiveness. He talked about being the servant of other people. These are all Pisces concepts. So the idea was that the president, the President of the United States, would be at the service of the nation, the mother country, and that elections would act as that form of revolution, if you will. So you see the grand trine, how everything works? Well, what happened was that FDR comes into power. And the same kind of shifts and frequencies are going to occur with whoever gets in after November 4th. And as I said, I don't think whoever's there is going to be there long, because there's going to be a lot of chaos and a lot of stuff that's going to happen this next week. It's going to be really, really harsh on the national psyche and what's going to be going on. FDR comes in, and he decides that he wants to change things, so he actually puts up a constitutional amendment to change the Constitution specifically, and he is then inaugurated as president, declaring emergency powers at that time. He comes in on January 20th of 1933, and specifically he changes it because his astrologer told him that if he was to come in January under the Capricorn Aquarius, that he would be king for life. So FDR was the one that changed it, and ever since then, when the president comes in now under Capricorn, primarily Capricorn moving into Aquarius, the president of the United States has come at the people rather than be the servant of the people. You guys with me? All right, so the reason I explain all this is that as to how it has to do with the stock market. It is my belief that the constitutional form of government under which we live under today did not come together until the Bill of Rights was signed. And the Bill of Rights, which altered the Constitution and got rid of the Articles of Confederation and all the other things that happened, let's just call it the fall of 1791 into the spring of 1792. Let's call it 1792. So my theory is each nation state or country has a cycle of 200 years. In the Bible, there are certain things that need to be obeyed for the health of the country that have to do with agriculture, that have to do with finance, and have to do with economics. If you look at the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the large majority of them have nothing to do with, oh, let's pray to God, or let's go worship God, or let's do whatever. It is a book of finances, economics, and politics. It is a way to set up a political system so that the children of Israel would be mighty, would be powerful, and they would go out and conquer the world and possess the gates of their enemies. Does this make sense? So you got dietary laws. You got clothing laws. You got economic laws. There are 616 laws, just not the 10 Commandments, but 616 separate laws in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, that basically lay out a nation state or country or civilization. These were primarily based on what's called the laws of the Jubilee. Very briefly, every 7 years, based on the Hebrew, based on a lunar calendar, based on the Hebrew calendar of how they timed things at that time, every 7 years you had to have what they call the Jubilee year. And the Jubilee year was a year of forgiveness, which meant if all you guys worked in a company that I owned, and I signed a contract with all of you to work for my company, that contract could only be good for 7 years. And at that point, at the end of that, you could break the contract and go work for somebody else, or you could come back, we'd re-sign the contract. You guys with me on this? By the way, this is what all our bankruptcy law is based on. It's what our contractual law is based on. It's what our, when you get away with a crime, what's it called? Statute of limitations. The statute of limitations specifically is all based on, it's all based on this 7-year cycle, all out of the Bible. Every 7 years, you free, when they say slaves in the Bible, you free the slaves. Those were contracted or indentured workers. So you renegotiate their contract, you free the slaves, you free all petty criminals. If you weren't guilty of a capital crime for which you were stoned, or if you got away and actually went outside the country, you can come back after 7 years. So you freed the prisoners, you freed the petty criminals, you broke all contracts, and at the same time you let the land lie fallow, which means you didn't grow crops for 1 year. In the 6th year, you were guaranteed a bumper crop. In the 7th year, you didn't plant. You lived off the land, if you will, for that year to allow the land to rest. You know why they did this? Because it returned the nutrients and the minerals to the soil so that the food you ate allowed you to become strong and mighty so you could defend the land upon which you were, so a bunch of other people over there didn't come over and kill you and take you off as slaves. Does this make sense? So you see how food is all involved in this, and and why the Bible's all about food, and actually the very first food combining also came from the Bible. So 7 times 7 is, in the 49th and 50th year, you let the land lie fallow for 2 years, and you gave land back to the people that originally owned it. So for example, if this nice lady here had a farm, and let's say something happened where she went bankrupt on her farm or land that was her ancestral land, and I came along and used her land, I can only take her land away from her or rent it, literally, for a period of 50 years or less. And at the end of that 50 years, I would have to go to either her or her eldest son or whoever her surviving relative was and say, here's your land back after 50 years. Because after 50 years, all the land changes hands anyway, and God in the Old Testament just figured out a way to do it peacefully. So land all returned to the people who originally owned it. If you didn't do this, and this is one of the reasons I'm pointing this out, because this relates to everything that's happening right now. If you don't do this, you had 4 cycles of 50, or 200 years, and after 200 years, if a nation state was found not to do these things, you went into something called the 5th cycle of discipline. Now remember, God was the one that punished nations, all right? God is the one that, I think the devil gets kind of a bad rap in the Bible. You know how many people the devil has killed, by the way? I just need to make this point. If you look at the Bible, and if you look at how many people, God kills everybody in the flood, God kills everybody. He's killed millions of people and promises to kill billions of people in the future because they don't obey the laws. You know how many people the devil's killed? You know how many people? No, seriously, I'm not trying to make a funny point here. You know how many people the devil's killed? 10. 10 in the Old Testament. You know who they were? Job's kids. 7 sons, 3 daughters. That's it. And that was on a bet from God. Because he said, I'll bet you if I kill his kids. And God said, go ahead. Just kill the kids. Killed 10. Now, technically, he could have killed Judas Iscariot if he possessed him, and let's pin Jesus on him as well. So that's 12. That's 12 people he's killed in the whole Bible. The reason I'm pointing this out is because all blessing and all punishment comes from God. That the idea is that God causes the rain to fall on the good and the bad alike. So these cycles that happen where if you obey the cycles, you are blessed and mighty. If you disobey them, certain things happen to you. So after 200 years, you go into a fifth cycle of discipline. That fifth cycle of discipline goes into 50 years, and at the end of 50 years, your nation is basically raped and enslaved. Foreigners own your land. You wind up working for them. The money accumulates in the hands of 1% of the people, and you're carted off. Your businesses are carted off by foreigners. Do you think that's pretty much where we're at now? So the reason I point this out is that this chart, which is sort of it's kind of an Armageddon kind of chart here. And let me just go to the next one so you understand where we're going with it. This is actually easier to read. This chart specifically shows what we call a Fibonacci wave or curve for the Dow Jones. And the reason I talked about the 200-year cycle is because from 92, if you add 7 to that to, let's call it 90, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, that was 7 years. We had the 7 fat years in the economy, right? Right after 99, it goes from 99, let's call it 2006 to 2007. This economic collapse that we're looking at really started in 2006. And the only reason you didn't see it in 2006 is because the Fed took the Federal Reserve note off the M3 index, which means the Fed no longer told you how much money they were printing. So they hid it. It became a big shell game after that. They used to tell you, we have X number of dollars in circulation, and then that way we could set inflation rates and everything else. Well, in 2006, they said, you can go piss up a rope. We're not even going to tell you how much money we're printing. We're going to print as much money as we feel like it. We're not even going to tell you how much money it is. Now, I interviewed the head of the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco for an article in my newsletter. And I asked him at that time, in 2006, how much money is in circulation? And he said, this is 2006, he says, 650, let's call it 700 billion cash in circulation worldwide. And I said, well, what's the national debt? He said, well, it's about 8 trillion. And he goes, and they just raised it, and they just, at that time, they raised it, and he goes, you're probably going to see it up to 10, probably 11 trillion in just like the next 3 years or so. And he says, they just raised it, it's 8 trillion now, they just raised it to like 9.5 trillion, it'll probably go up beyond that. And I said, well, how do you have to pay the national debt? And he said, in Federal Reserve notes. So, well, how do you pay $8 trillion in national debt if there's only $700 billion in circulation? His exact words, as an expert in the economic field and president of the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco, was, I don't know. I don't know. He then said, I think they're going to go to some sort of chip-based economy. I said, what does that mean? He goes, well, you know, they're going to put chips in credit cards, and then there'll be a lot of theft, and they'll probably just start putting them in people's hands or in their foreheads or something. And I'm like, you know, he just threw this out there, like, you know, everybody knows this. And then I thought, well, that's interesting. And he said, so, you know, they really want to get away from printing the money. We really want to go to what we call a photonic money supply. And I said, what does that mean? He goes, well, then it's just all ledgers in a computer. It's all just blips of light. So we don't actually have to print it. So one of the reasons why there were so many concerns about counterfeiting our money out of North Korea is they used to print most of the Federal Reserve notes in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. But there it was costing them anywhere between 9 to 14 cents a bill. Doesn't matter if it's a $100 bill or a $1 bill. It's costing about 9 to 14 cents. So they shipped all the printing presses to South Korea, where it only cost 4 cents to print the bills. And then the North Koreans stole the plates. And so the North Koreans were then printing $100 bills like crazy. And they gave a bunch of the plates, copies of the plates, to the Iranians. And the Iranians were counterfeiting our money at that time, which it's just turned into a big mess. So at the same time this was going on in 2006, preparing for this big financial collapse, the Federal Reserve, actually between 2006, 2007, 2008, the Federal Reserve began buying gold. And did you know that the Federal Reserve, and this will shock you at first, and it'll surprise you when I tell you why, did you know that the Federal Reserve could go over to the Treasury and buy gold for 45 cents an ounce? Wow. 45 cents an ounce. You know how? Because that's how much it costs to print 9 $100 bills. 5 cents a piece, times 9. So they took 9 $100 bills, went over to the Treasury, traded it for gold, took them back over to the Federal Reserve. Ben Shalom Bernanke stands up in front of the Congress, and they say, you can't just take money that's worth nothing and walk over to the Capitol building and buy securities and gold that are worth something. And Ben Bernanke said, have you read the 16th Amendment of the Constitution? Yeah, we can. And he laughed in Congress's face and said, we're the Federal Reserve. We can do pretty much anything we want. And I'm just here to inform you. I'm not responsible to you. I'm just here to inform you. And Congress is just sitting there going, because they can do absolutely nothing. So this chart, this is the bad news. This chart, there's 14,000. 14,000, and actually what the chart went to is it actually went as high as, my prediction on this entire wave chart, this was done almost 10 years ago, is that I talked about the stock market going to 14,500 conservatively at one end to maybe 16,000 at the other end. This was 10 years ago when I was making these predictions. Saying what was going to happen is that you were going to see everything turn into a Jenga economy. And what that means is that here you have, here's the economy where everything's all nice and spread out and everybody owns something. And what happens is that as companies and corporations begin to buy each other and buy each other and buy each other, see how there's less space and less companies and less corporations? Therefore, because now you only have about 30 companies that own anything on the Dow Jones, you see why the stock market goes straight up now? Because these companies are the only things that own anything. So I said once it gets to about 30 companies of about 14,500, and I took some flack because the market went to 14,383, and they're like, "Oh, Sean Morton missed it by 120. It didn't really go to 14.5." So right here was the headline, and actually this is all back here. This is actually just a current chart. But here is the actual flow. Actually, here is the projected flow of the markets here. Okay. Now this is the up downs of the markets here. Now what we've had happen is we've had the markets in the past go this low to this wave. As each one hits this particular wave, it then goes up to the next wave, and then we know, because we then draw out a Fibonacci wave, as to where the market's going to go next. This is the projection. You see this projection? You see that spike right there? That's the projection for what's going to happen to the market next week. So there are like e-signal guys and traders and people out there who are losing their minds right now. There were some people, there's a woman who came up to me today, said she was trying to access her Washington Mutual Wachovia account, said she couldn't do it. Said all the computers were down, that something freaky was happening. I don't know, you guys might want to check this when you get home. But the projection would be is that the market was going to go to 7,860, right here, actually below that. And then if it goes there, it bounces off that line, and it'll come back up again. But this is the line of the projection of what the next wave would be. If the market goes to 7,000, let's call it 7,200 to 75, the next line is going to be 6,018. The next line after that is 5,000, and the next line under that, 3,082. I mean, there's just a projection. I think that what would happen is when the market hits 6,000 here, the government would step in and start closing and seizing banks. I think what's going to happen, the reason this projection wave goes on, is that I think the derivatives market's going to collapse in the next 60 days. And if that does it, the derivatives market is futures, it's a casino. It's all kind of made up stuff. This chart basically says, and the top guys on Wall Street know exactly what I'm talking about, but this chart right here, basically what you're looking at is the door closing on the casino. Something's going to have to give, which means either they're going to have to re-regulate the markets savagely, which is the first thing that they're going to have to do when either Obama or McCain or Sarah Palin takes over, whatever happens, because they can't allow this to happen. Because this is 1,000 right here, and the wave under that actually puts the market in the red. And when this happened in Iceland, they seized the banks and the companies went bankrupt. The whole country went bankrupt. Europe is in a complete panic, in a total free fall, because you have 26 countries in Europe, and there is no European Union without Germany. And they were all looking to Germany to bail out all these European countries, and Germany said, no thanks, we got money, but it's money for us, not money for you. We're not going to give you money that we don't have control over, which means now Spain's been bankrupt for about a year. Italy, they've been bankrupt since the Second World War. You realize they've had 460 governments since the Second World War, the Italians? I mean, all they do is drink wine, ride scooters, and go, ciao, baby, ciao. But France, actually, basically just, Iceland went bankrupt, and France went bankrupt after that. So all these countries are hanging on by their fingernails, and there's no money left. And if the derivatives market collapses, it's a challenge. What's the solution? The solution would be is that I have some projections on gold. I think that here's what's happening in gold or silver. Like I said, am I boring you guys with this? Is this okay to talk about this? Because I know you guys paid to be here, so I'm all about answering your questions, because I think monologues are dictatorial and ultimately fascist and lead to Republican administrations. So so whatever questions you have. And I have one gentleman who actually wrote his questions down, so he got his questions answered. So, he didn't spell them right, and I have to correct this paper later, so I don't have my red pen on me.
I never read
Gold. My projection for gold was we'd see gold at 775. It's on its way now, and once it bounces off the resistance line of 775, let's call it, because it seems like I've been off on gold by between 25 and 40 bucks. Let's call it 750. But if it hits the 750, 75 range, I'd buy a bunch of it. Because the European banks are panicking. You hear that sound? That's Europe screaming right now, and somebody's cell phone. Shame on you. That's the Europeans going crazy, and the Europeans in the last 30 days have dumped over $1 billion in gold onto the world market. That's why gold's gone down. Because the Europeans are dumping gold, specifically the Bundesbank in Germany, which controls a lot of the gold, and Royal Bank of Scotland. Royal Bank of Scotland just went from AAA. They just had their credit rating downgraded, and that's a huge, big deal because they're a gigantic bank in England, but they just went from AAA to A, and they're on their way to B, being downgraded. So what they're trying to do is raise paper capital with gold, and that's one of the reasons why gold has gone down, because they just started dumping it about, like I said, about 30 days ago. So that's why you're seeing it go down. Gold acts really funny when it gets around $1,000 an ounce, because it's sort of like the speed of light. The minute it gets to like 1,000 an ounce, it just begins to expand geometrically, because a lot of it comes out of India, and women in India have every woman in India has got about 7 pounds of gold as far as jewelry. Just walking down the street, they got about 7 or 8 pounds of gold hanging off their arms, their ears, their noses, and everywhere else. Just coming out of everywhere in India. So they start selling that. Have you now seen this commercial on TV where you can send your bracelet in and you get gold? And it's like, I sold my wedding ring for my first marriage, and I got cash. I tried to send my husband in, but they wouldn't give me no money for him. So it's just interesting when it gets over 1,000. But my projection for gold is that if it hits 775, the next resistance line for gold should be around 1,200 bucks. And that's going to be really unusual, but that should happen within about the next 6 months. You're going to see silver drop. I mean, I'm still really bullish on silver too, but you'll see silver drop under 9, probably also to $8.75. But you have to understand that Warren Buffett has started buying silver again too. So if Warren Buffett's out there buying silver, go get some reports. Look up Warren Buffett on the net. Find out what the hell Warren Buffett's buying and buy that. Buy that. Because Warren Buffett's... And here's... Not only is Warren Buffett his famous saying about... If you ever read Warren Buffett's book, Warren Buffett says, you always invest in stuff that's crazy. That's the first thing he says. He says, use other people's money. That's the first thing. The second thing he says is, always go against the grain and invest in stuff that other people think is nuts, because eventually the grain turns. And his most famous saying from his book, that is, you guys have all heard it this week, which is, be fearful when people are greedy and be greedy when people are fearful. So if Warren Buffett... I was on Coast to Coast, and I was saying, look, silver's going to go up. I see Caterpillar as a fantastic pick. This was a couple of years ago. I see Caterpillar as a great pick. It was really weird because about 4 weeks later, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett bought every company that I recommended on Coast to Coast, which is really kind of strange. And I'm like, and I know Bill Gates listens to the show, so because I got a buddy of mine, Anthony Michael Hall, who actually played him in a movie called Pirates of Silicon Valley, and I thought it was kind of weird because Mike goes, yeah, Bill Gates is like a fan of yours when you're on the radio. I'm like, dude, well, can I call him up to do my taxes or something? It's like, yo, Money, what's up? Yo, it's Sean. What's happening, Money? Who is this? It's Sean Morton. So it's always kind of weird because when I go to stuff in Los Angeles, there's so many writers and so many artists that listen to late night radio. I belong to the Writers Guild, and I'm sitting at a table at the Writers Guild, and we're just talking amongst each other. And I said, hey, how you doing? I'm Sean Morton, and one guy looks at me and goes, Sean Morton. He says, your voice sounds really familiar. He says, are you the Sean David Morton? I'm like, yeah. And it's like they genuflect. And they say, oh, I love you. I've come up with so many ideas and so many movies from stuff you said on the radio. I'm like, hey, send me a check, pal. All right, so the reason I wanted to point this out to you is because, again, this chart comes from one of my foreign exchange trading friends down in Florida, and there's a guy named Clay who is one of these idiot savants who is it's weird when you deal with forex traders. It's really strange because they're like total basement monkeys that live in mom and dad's basement, and yet they're combine those with Wild West gunslingers and combine those with a bunch of Jewish accountants, and you get an idea of what forex traders are like. You get Yiddish cowboys, back in Egypt going, hey Shlomo, what do you say? I sold the yen cheap, bang, bang, bang. So Clay, who does these charts, doesn't read the newspapers, doesn't watch television, doesn't see anything. He said he hadn't read a newspaper, watched the TV in 3 years. He came back after 3 years, read a newspaper, watched the TV, and he said it was the exact same stuff they were talking about 3 years ago. They just put a different date on the newspaper. He says, what, they only bake like 50 newspapers and just change the date around because they're talking about exactly the same stuff. So when Clay put this chart together, we just asked him to do something on the Dow Jones, and this is the wave that he came up with based on the Fibonacci wave curve that goes all the way back to October 17th of 1987. This is the end of the market. This was what we projected as being the end of the market at that time. Now, when Bernanke and his gang started printing money like it was going out of style in 2006 and took it off the M3 index, at that time, I started screaming, this is the beginning of the financial collapse. It's going to take 18 months to 2 years for it to happen. Here we are. 10 years before that, in the 90s, I started screaming about they're going to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act. And the Glass-Steagall Act was passed during the Depression to create firewalls between banks, savings and loans, brokerage houses, everything else. And I said, look, once the Glass-Steagall Act is gone, it happened. They repealed it because thanks to Clinton and Phil Graham. I said, this is the beginning of the end. This is probably going to run another 7 or 8 years, but every bank is going to buy up this bank, that bank, the other bank, and there's only going to be like 2 monolithic banks. And what you're seeing now worldwide, the 2 slathering wolves that are literally facing off against each other are the European royal families represented by the Rothschild Banking Trust in Europe and the Rockefeller-Clinton crime syndicate, the Rockefeller-Bush-Clinton crime syndicate here in the United States, which basically wants to combine the United States, Canada, and Mexico into the North American Union and quite possibly introduce the Amero. You guys know, somebody had a question about the Amero specifically. The Amero is currently being minted at the Denver Mint. You can order it online if you want. It's really, have you seen the coins, the Amero coins, anybody? If you see the Amero coins, it literally looks like, it has these Stalinist images, you know, these kind of muscled people with like sickles and hammers, and I mean, it looks like it's literally right out of a subway in Moscow. These images on the coins. Now, Hal Turner, let me give you some information and let me debunk some disinformation. Hal Turner's been out there for quite some time, who's been talking about the Amero being this currency that's going to be used in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Initially, the goal was to reduce the dollar to such a level that we were on par with the Canadian dollar, or loon as they call it, and the Mexican peso. Well, that's now pretty much happened with Canada, because if you notice, Canadian dollars are worth, what, $1.19, I think now? So it's literally worth like 19 cents more than our money, which is really sucks when you go up there, man. Like, there's 60 million people in this country, of which only about 30 million of them are really Canadians, because the rest are immigrants, and their exports are maple syrup and snow. How can their money be worth more than ours? Number one, the peso went down to about 14. Yeah, you know, that's what it's at now. But I said the peso went down to about 6.5 or so to the dollar. Then what happened when the European Union just completely fell apart? The Europeans are now getting out of all their dollars, liras, francs, euros, whatever else, and they're putting in US dollars because they don't see the United States going bankrupt or going anywhere anytime soon. That's why the dollar is now starting to build its way back up. Okay? And one other thing, let me finish the currency thing first. Hal Turner talked about the Amero being minted. It's real. The United States Mint is out of Denver, is minting the Amero now as a secondary money system. That's number one. Number two, there has been a lot of talk about the Chinese now having 80 billion Ameros, if you will, in banks as a fund. I haven't seen any proof of that. There's been a lot of internet chatter and a lot of stuff out there, but there hasn't anybody that's come up with anything significant or specific to prove that. Hal Turner claims, he's a radio host out of Colorado, claims that there are Amero silver certificates that are already being made up. In other words, an Amero would be worth, you could go into a bank and you could say, well, here's $1 in an Amero, and they would actually give you the equivalent in silver. That's a lie. That has not happened because silver is going down right now, and nobody has bought silver in mass, because the only way they can do that is they have to have a silver reserve. Does this make sense? You guys with me on this? So they have to have a silver reserve. They have to have a bunch of silver like Fort Knox with the gold set aside for them to be able to do this kind of stuff. So until you see, and there might be, with silver going down, they might be, now that it's down to about $9, and if it hits like $8.75 or so, they could buy a bunch of the stuff. Then when silver goes up to like $20, $25 again in about 2 years or so, then they'll actually have a reserve that's worth enough to be able to back a currency with it. You guys with me on this? So they haven't began printing the Amero notes, the silver certificates yet. What they might do, there's 3 possibilities that are on the table now. Number one, they will induce a dual currency. And the dual currency will be that outside the United States, and I saw these with my own eyes in Amsterdam. Went to Amsterdam for a business deal there. We were talking to some bankers out at the airport. They took us into this big vault. They knew everybody. And we walked in, and they had these big cases of, armed guards and vaults and the whole thing. And they had cases of these brand new $100 bills that had this pink tinge on them. This was before they started releasing the red tinged money, the 50s and the 10s and all that here in the United States. But they had a reddish pinkish tinge. They had, it looked like glitter actually through it, but it was some kind of nanotechnology or something that was going through it for counterfeiting. And they had stacks of these things in this vault by the airport in Amsterdam. And I said, well, what are these for? And they said, well, this is a specially coded $100 bill that specifically will be used to set up a secondary currency or a US dollar that can only be used outside the United States. So what the Japanese did when their currencies tanked in the 1980s is they set up what they call the foreign and a domestic yen. That allowed them to basically just hyperinflate the snot out of their domestic currency and then keep their foreign currency for trade purposes steady. So that's phase number one. Phase number two is they may just let the Federal Reserve note go. So as far as we're concerned, the U.S. dollar, it's not really the U.S. dollar, but the Federal Reserve note just slides out of existence because it just hyperinflates, literally like the Wehrmacht Republic where you have to have a wheelbarrow full of the stuff to buy a loaf of bread. They might just let it go, then introduce the Amero, and all they have to do, they don't even have to introduce the currency. All they have to do is the big banks and the big credit card companies like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, all they have to do is say to you, would you like to charge this in Ameros, which are backed by something and cheaper and keep their value, or would you like to charge this in dollars? That's it. Then it's a photonic economy. Then it's all just blips of light. That's what they did in Europe. Anybody travel to Europe where they said you want this charged in francs or marks or liras or in euros? Well, you get a better exchange rate with euros. There's a better process. Anybody travel to Europe where this happens? You can still do it now. You can still trade in francs in France, and or trade in euros. So they'll introduce two currencies at the same time: the Amero that you can use in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and at the same time still have the U.S. dollar while they phase the U.S. dollar out. Their goal from the beginning is to have three currencies: to have the euro, to have the Amero, and then have the Chinese yuan over most of Asia, and then have three massive power blocks. And you know where this comes from. It's not a warning, and there's a reason why it's Hillary Clinton's favorite book. It's right out of 1984. 1984, Eric Blair, or George Orwell, was a Fabian socialist. And 1984, it's a blueprint. It's not a warning. It's a blueprint for how technology is going to evolve, and it's evolved exactly along those lines. The original title of 1984 was 1948, and Orwell said, well, that's too soon, and just flipped the last two numbers and made it 1984. But if you'll notice, that's exactly where the world is going. And if you read 1984 again, I know, that sometimes they make you read it in school, sometimes depending on which school you went to. But that's the blueprint for what's going on. So, let me see if I got anything else in here. Be greedy when others are fearful, be fearful when others are greedy. There you go, Warren Buffett, October 2008. Now, I don't know where my wife is, because she usually sets this stuff up for me, so hold on 1 second. Is Melissa back there anywhere, or did she take a break? Okay, well, whenever she gets around, I'm going to...
How about oil?
Hold on. I'm going to talk about that right this second. Hold on. Get rid of this. Dow Jones.
What's the Amero made of? Is it silver?
It's kind of weird. It looks like copper in the center, and I don't know what it's got like a coppery looking center, and then it's got a ring around the outside that looks silver. Yes, sir.
Do you think silver is going to hit 30 in 2 years?
I do. Yes, I do. I think silver again. Why? Because they're going to have to start backing currency with something. This is, once again, Pluto and Capricorn, which happens November 27th. Pluto and Capricorn is going to be, people are going to touch it, feel it, taste it. Anything that's not real is going to be gone. And you can fix it today. I mean, the United States has seen this kind of inflation and these kind of problems before. We had an inflationary rate right after the Revolutionary War, and all it took was, and when Thomas Jefferson came in and we had a massive national debt, inflation was going crazy. All Thomas Jefferson did was that he slashed taxes by 50%, based the currency on gold and silver, and we managed to then pay off, by slashing taxes by 50%, he paid off the U.S. debt in less than 2 years. So, and again, when you have somebody like Ron Paul saying that, well, the money system is based on nothing, and that anybody who thinks that the Constitution is still in force is crazy, and that the Republic ended October 1st of 2008, he's exactly right. We're now more communist than China, because we now have a nationalized economy. because that's what's going on. And actually, let me just real quick answer these questions from this gentleman here. Why is the U.S. still in Afghanistan 7 years later? Soviets 10 years later? That's actually a very good question. Who asked that question? You, sir? What's your name? Francisco. We're still there because we're still making tons of money off opium. It's the opium trade in Afghanistan. And actually what happened was the reason... I'm sorry?
It's not the natural gas.
That too, because we've got a pipeline that also runs through Afghanistan at the same time. The progression of this was, the reason the Soviets went in 1980, 79, 80, was because, once again, they wanted to control the global opium trade, which was a cash trade of anywhere between $60 to $80 billion at that time. It's probably worth more now. In 2001, just to give you the progression leading up to 9/11, in 2001 the Taliban decided, well, it's against the Quran to deal opium, even though we're making a bunch of money, so they burned the poppy fields, which the United States did not find amusing whatsoever. And when you take $60 to $80 billion cash out of the world market, people notice, and they get mad. So we said, oh, good for you. I tell you what, we'll give you $500 million, it was really literally more than that, to build schools and roads on the surface with the threat you use this money to replant the poppy fields or there's going to be hell to pay. They took the money and they said, well, thank you, great Satan, for this money, but we're really going to build roads and schools. And we went, okay, very funny. And in July, we came along and we said, okay, here's the deal. You took our money, you didn't replant the poppies, we still got all this money that we're missing now. We need to build a pipeline. Unocal needs to build a pipeline through Afghanistan. If you help us with this pipeline, we will offer you a road of gold, and if you don't, we will offer you a carpet of bombs. And the Taliban said, thank you, great Satan, but we don't want your pipeline either. And 9/11 happened, and within 60 days, we had troops on the ground in Afghanistan. Which now, by the way, Afghanistan is doing very well, thank you, and just topped something like $100 billion total cash in the world opium trade. That's why we're there. But the reason the Soviets collapsed, you will notice when the Soviets went in 1980, their economy went bankrupt in 89, and in November of 1989, when the Western European banks would no longer carry the credit of Russia, 10 days later, when they basically took their credit rating from AAA down to F and said, we're not floating your loans anymore, 10 days later the Berlin Wall fell. It's all economics, kids. It's all money. I know it's boring and whatever else, but that's when the Berlin Wall fell. Now you see what's happening with the United States. Our economy was at the end of its rope. We invade Afghanistan to get all this cash money, but you see what's happening. You just can't support the economy just on opium. You have to do something with it. And so the opium-based economy is now, and once again, we've given these people all the rope that they need, and now they've hung themselves. And you notice how we're mirroring the pattern of the Soviet Union? So now it's 7, 8 years later, and now we're facing bankruptcy at the same time. All the superpowers were on this race to Armageddon to just jump. Who was going to jump off the cliff first? So that's what's going on with that. So hold on one second. What's there besides gas? Opium. That's to answer your question. What's Palin's royal bloodline? What's Palin's royal bloodline?
Why would she pick? She has to have royal blood.
I don't know. I'm not that familiar with the conspiracy theory behind Sarah Palin. I'm turned on and kind of terrified all at the same time every time I see her. I just want her to be like at a school and have somebody play Hot for Teacher by Van Halen and have her whip off those glasses and dance in a bikini. I don't know. I know that Obama, there are people that are talking that Stanley Ann Dunham, his mother, that he's something like, 14th cousins with Dick Cheney or something, and through his mother's side he has a bunch of royal blood. Why did Lehman Brothers fail and not the others? Interesting. Well, actually they are failing now. And the one mistake that Henry Paulson made is that for pennies on the dollar, he could have bailed out Lehman Brothers. And had he bailed out Lehman Brothers, we would have been okay. I mean, everything else wouldn't have collapsed because with the failure of Lehman Brothers, everything else just went straight to hell. And I know Henry Paulson. I mean, years ago, I was dating a girl over at Goldman Sachs in New York, and Hank used to get my newsletter, and he was like, "Man, this is the greatest thing ever, and I've made billions off this." I'm like, "Write me a check, man." He goes, "You get your $65. Shut up," And I think the reason he became Secretary of the Treasury in the first place is because he approached Bush. There's a guy out there by the name of Leo Wanta that's got a fund that's worth about $5 trillion or so. And Paulson said, "I can show you how to steal this guy's money, and we can make ourselves, $5 trillion." And Bush said, "I'm listening." And that's why he made him Secretary of the Treasury, because they figured out how to do this great crime. And it's also why the Russians are kind of getting even with us now. Just in brief, the plan of the Reagan administration in the 1980s was to, number one, Reagan met in Iceland, in Reykjavik, with Gorbachev, and he went away from that conference in 1985, and he was pissed off because Gorbachev didn't want to end the Cold War. Gorbachev didn't play ball. So basically, Reagan said, I'm going to get these guys. And what they did is they started, and this was in the movie. Did anybody see the movie Charlie Wilson's War? You guys get a chance to rent it on DVD. It's worth renting. Charlie Wilson's War. Charlie Wilson was this Texas congressman that was tasked by the Reagan administration to start arming the Mujahideen. British intelligence was in there. Osama bin Laden was our big buddy. His code name was Tim Osman at the time. We flew him back and forth for kidney treatments into the United States. He was our pal because he was the big hero of the Afghan resistance. We armed them through the CIA to be able to fight the Soviets to a standstill so they would waste billions upon billions of dollars in Afghanistan and to burn the poppy fields so they couldn't get anything else. So that was phase one. Phase two was to actually create an economic war against the Russians to turn their entire economy into junk. And Wanta was given a multi-trillion-dollar fund to basically float their bonds, counterfeit their money, counterfeit rubles, and once again, he single-handedly turned the entire Russian bond market into trash. And when their credit rating went from AAA to 4F, as I said, when the European banks would no longer carry the Soviet loans, in 10 days the Berlin Wall fell, and basically we won the Cold War without a shot being fired because Reagan sent this ambassador over there with his fund of money, this super fund, to be able to basically trick the Soviets into making a whole bunch of bad investments, and we just bankrupted their economy. Phase three of what this was supposed to be was the super fund that Wanta had was supposed to go into Russia to set up a free market economy so that we would have a long-lasting peace. When Bush got in, Poppy Bush the first, he went in and said, not so fast, because the Bushes have a way of just creating chaos everywhere they go. He handed the country over to David Rockefeller, and while the country was on its knees, David Rockefeller, living at his house outside of St. Petersburg, just started kicking the Russians while they were down. And that's why you saw, in the 90s, that's why you saw Russia turn into that mafia economy, because David Rockefeller was at the top of it all, with the Chase Manhattan Bank looting that country 12 ways to Sunday. And Putin, not only does he know about it, he doesn't forget. Because when Putin started taking over and trying to turn things around, the minute, this was 3 years ago, the Russians paid off all their debts. Well, this is, let me give you the genesis of that because it leads into oil. Number one, they took seriously a paper by a German scientist. It was written by the 1930s. This crazy German scientist, Hoffenberger, I forget his name, but this crazy German scientist began to say that oil was a renewable resource. And the renewable resource is that if you drilled down deep enough, the oil became, and the term is, I hope I'm saying it correctly, amniotic. Am I saying it correctly? Amniotic oil? And the amniotic oil means that if you drill down, if you go past the fossil fuel layer of oil, if you go past, Bedrock and the Flintstones and Pebbles and Bam Bam and Barney Rubble and Dino and, and then cut sideways and go, past where Fred Flintstone used to work and go down underneath that, you actually hit a pocket of oil that's like a light sweet crude specifically that replenishes itself as a natural process of the earth. Well, they drill a hole in 96 and 97 in Siberia that's about 48,000 feet deep, and that well, or that field from those very, very deep wells has been spewing out a perfect light sweet crude that you can put right in your car practically right out of the ground, and the Russians started making money like crazy. And 3 years ago, they paid off all their debts, and they kicked out the International Monetary Fund, which was Paul Wolfowitz, and Putin banged on David Rockefeller's door, grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, kicked him in the ass, and personally threw him out of the country. So it gives you an idea of now why, when Putin says, and this is Vladimir Putin who says this, we are the primary enemies of the Zionist conspiracy in the world. Because he views the banks and the United States and the Israelis and what he calls the Zionist banks as being now specifically against Russia. Well, if Russia doesn't have, and I'm using his words now, if Russia, and by the way, let me comment on this, anybody who thinks that it's, quote, a Jewish conspiracy, well, the Rockefellers are Baptists. Is it a Baptist conspiracy? And even the Rothschilds themselves, being a Jewish banking family, they only control, they're just the guys that control the money. They maybe make 5% off the real money, which is the royal houses, the royal families. The world is still controlled by the Windsors, the Habsburgs, the kings of Spain, the kings of the Netherlands, the whole thing. The Rothschilds are basically just they're the clearinghouse for the real money, which goes all the way back 500 years or so to the de Medicis and whatever else. So it's not a Jewish banking conspiracy. It's really the Rothschilds are just they're just good at actually handling other people's money. So the point behind this whole thing is that now the Russians, who are debt-free, are now we're trying to start another war with the Russians because we want them to start spending money. at the same time, the Russian economy is just taking off, and it's just going crazy. So, there's a question. I'm sorry. Question. Yes. Yes, Reggie.
With this scenario, how does something basic like I-bonds pan out with just having your money in there?
How I-bonds pans out?
Yeah, just
I don't know.
government bonds.
Just government bonds?
Yes, our government.
Not so good. I don't have any opinions on it because I haven't really done any research on it, so I don't want to shoot my mouth off about something I don't know anything about. Yes, sir.
Yes, how do you foresee within a few months, in about a year's time, the trend of the dollar versus the euro? I tend to think the dollar is going to tank much further down.
You think the dollar is going to tank? I disagree. I think this entire thing has been about getting the dollar back up, and it's all about. I talk to these Pentagon guys. I'm like, oh my God, it's Armageddon, and what are we going to do? And the United States is just tanking. And these guys laugh, and they go, no, they're not. It's all part of the plan. He said, here's what happened to the Europeans. The euro, what happened to the Europeans is exactly what happened to the United States in the Roaring '20s. I mean, it took, when the Federal Reserve Bank took over, and by the way, anybody who thinks we have a free market economy doesn't realize that we haven't had a free market economy since the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. That what happened was the Federal Reserve Act happened, and it took exactly 20 years for the Federal Reserve to loosen up the money supply, provide money like crazy, which then fueled the Roaring '20s, then stop the money supply, loan out all this money cheap, then stop printing money, then confiscate everybody's stuff. So it took them 20 years to bankrupt the United States government. When they bankrupted the government, the arbitrator of the bankruptcy became the Supreme Court. You can actually look on the fourth pillar of the Supreme Court. It says the U.S. Supreme Court of Bankruptcy, 1933. So the arbitrator of the bankruptcy of the Supreme Court, the debtor is the United States government, where the person that holds the note is the Federal Reserve banks. All of you, by the way, when you are born, they take your birth certificate, they submit it to the Commerce Department, and every single one of you, when you get your little Social Security number and you get stamped and everything else, that birth certificate is then bonded and loaned out, and every single one of you is collateral for the bankruptcy of 1933. That's how the government borrows more money. What they do is that Farmer Brown goes to the bank. Farmer Brown says, I need $1 million. The bank says, what's your collateral? You say, Farmer Brown says, well, I've got 1,000 cows. And the cows all have brands on them, and they have tags on their ears, and they're numbered, and I have the birth certificates right here that prove that I own them. And each one of these 1,000 cows is worth $1 million. I'm going to give you those birth certificates and the titles of ownership, and the bank then owes you $1 million. Well, that's what happens. The United States government says, we have all these people that we own, because under Social Security cards and your birth certificates and whatever, they hand those over to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve then loans the money based on you, based on the fact that you are collateral. That's why when you kill civilians in a war, it's called collateral damage. Because you're all collateral for money and bankruptcy. This is how it works. Let me tell you what the money supply is based on. On June 5th, 1933, House Joint Resolution 192, let me tell you what they based the money supply on. They outlawed gold. They outlawed silver. They said you couldn't own it anymore. They confiscated all your real wealth in gold and silver. And at the same time, they now said, violating Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution that says you have to base money on gold and silver, they now say that the monetary system of the United States, and this is metaphysics in its rawest, most beautiful, elegant form, the money system of the United States is based on the faith, energy, and spirit of the people of the United States. Faith, which means you believe that money exists. Spirit, which means you think things up to get more money. Energy, which means you get up out of bed every day and move your arms and legs around to create value. Faith, energy, and spirit, which means when I go into a bank to borrow money, it's a chimera. It's fake. I sign on the dotted line. My signature is the only thing that allows them to borrow money into existence. They turn around, they go to the window at the Federal Reserve Bank. They hand them my signature, which is a promise to repay in what we call sweat equity, which means I promise to get up every morning, move my arms and legs around, and try to think of some way to create value in the society to pay back this fake money. They go out and cut down a tree, make a bunch of papers, sprinkle magic pixie dust on it, push it back through the window, and then the bank gives me money. What they're doing is they're cutting off my arm, taking it in the back, cooking it, and saying, here, would you like a piece? That's how it works. This lady talked about how do you sign off debt. You want to know how? Well, once again, if you don't want to be involved in the debt system or the debt structure, and they're private companies, so they can do pretty much whatever they want, there's an easy way to sign off debt. You can literally, as what we call a secured party creditor, you can actually sign off debt specifically with your signature. I mean, there are ways to do it. Or you can question the money supply. I've gone into court. I was goofing around. You guys have heard the story before. Did you guys ever tell you the story about I went into court on the parking ticket or the traffic ticket? I've told the story before, just in brief, because you guys have heard it before. I walked into court. I had a ticket for a taillight that was busted or something. I let it go. It went to warrant. I just figured I was going to goof around with this judge a little bit. I get dressed up in my suit and tie. I walk into the court. Court says, well, Mr. Morton, you failed to appear. You had a tail light. How do you plead? I said, I'd like to know what kind of law is practiced in this court. And he goes, well, it's a municipal court. And I said, well, that's not what I asked. I need to know what kind of law. I notice you have 2 flags with gold fringes, which are military law flags. And I notice one's on a spear and one's on a mace, which are weapons. So I'd like to know, is it criminal, civil, contractual, bankruptcy, or admiralty law, or it's not a superior court, or admiralty law that's being practiced in the court? And the judge said, well, it's admiralty law. And I said, well, if it's admiralty law, I wasn't in a boat when this happened. I mean, I wasn't at sea. It wasn't like the Coast Guard pulled me over for running over a dolphin or a manatee or something. I said, what's your jurisdiction if it's admiralty? And he goes, well, you may be very smart, Mr. Morton, but this piece of paper says, it doesn't matter what the charge is, this piece of paper said you signed a contract that said you were supposed to be someplace in a specific place at a specific time. Were you or were you not there at that point in time? At that point in time, you're in dishonor. And he was absolutely right. And I go, okay, you got me guilty. I didn't show up for the thing. He goes, well, I'll dismiss the taillight thing, but here you go. You didn't show up. How do you plead? Guilty. $483, 100 and whatever it is in court costs, blah, 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 pay the bailiff. He was about ready to stamp his gavel. I said, can I ask another question? And he said, sure. You know how everybody's asleep in court? Everybody's like on the edge of their seats, and now there's this bailiff of rather questionable sexuality that's standing behind me, and this woman who's got one of these, these really butch haircuts, she's standing behind me. I mean, she's like butch. I mean, she's got these big shoulders. While I'm asking these questions, I hear her unsnap her gun behind me and take a step forward and stand out and look back behind me like this, and she's kind of going, and I say to the judge, I say, well, Your Honor, I just have a question here, and I pulled the Constitution out of my pocket, and I said, Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution says, well, it says right here that only gold or silver is legal tender for all debts, public or private. Oh, also, the California Constitution, also Article 1, Section 10, says the exact same thing, only gold or silver. So I might ask you, since there hasn't been a Supreme Court decision or an amendment to the Constitution, I might ask you, since I don't have any gold or silver, how would you like me to pay this debt? And the judge just made this face like this. He's just looking at me like that, right? And all the people are staring at him. And he goes, well, Mr. Morton, how would you like to pay this debt? And I said, no, Your Honor, I defer to you. Please, it's really a conundrum. I don't know. Kept asking questions, mind you, so I'm not in contempt. I said, how would you like me to pay it? He goes, no, Mr. Morton, how would you like to pay it? How would you like me 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 to pay it? I said, 10 minutes, this went on. A stack of Bibles, this went on. How would you like to pay it? No, it's you. How would you like to pay it? He goes, all right, I'm sick of this. I don't have time for this. You take your gold or silver, and you go out and you get Federal Reserve notes, and you come back and you pay the goddamn fine. And I said, so I just want to say, and he's like holding his gavel in the air again, I just want to say that in front of God and everybody, you're ordering me to violate the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution from the bench, which you took an oath to uphold, not me, for which you can be impeached or disbarred. Am I right? And he was like, bailiff? And this woman grabs me, and I turned into a total wussy. My cojones just shrank, and I was in my suit, and I was not going to have this woman beat me up. I was like, okay, I'll make a deal. And he's like, just like Caligula. He was just like, away. And he says, all right, I love deals. What kind of deal would you like to make? And I said, I'll pay a fine of $20 or less, because the Constitution says I can be fined $20 or less without a jury trial. And he goes, deal. And the fine was $15. So, I can just give you an idea of this because I have written, the one other lawsuit I've ever been involved with, the lawsuit was dismissed and I had to pay some court costs and I didn't want to pay the court costs, so I wrote a letter to the Attorney General that said I have a dispute. And the dispute is I would like a proof of claim that California is not part of the bankruptcy of 1933 and that there's money at large to actually pay this debt, and please tell me how am I supposed to pay this debt in the absence of gold or silver. Well, an unrebutted affidavit stands as fact and law, and they never wrote me back. Therefore, I used that to actually have the judgment set aside, because I said, there's no way to pay you because there's no money. Ha-ha, see? Try trying that on a credit card company sometime. Because when you take it to court, they're going to have to dismiss it. They have to, because they don't want anything, they can't make a judgment on it, because they don't want anything that goes to appeals. So, there's a whole different thing on this. It's called secure party creditor. That's a whole other lecture that I don't want to get into. Basil, yes, you had a question.
One question. Can you explain to him about Hugo Chavez and the bank?
Can I explain to them about Hugo Chavez and
the Lehman Bank?
I don't know that much about it.
The money that he has in the bank and why...
The money Hugo Chavez hasn't
to the country.
I don't know that much about it. All I know is that the Russians, excuse me. All I know is that when Poland joined NATO, and when the United States put short-range nuclear weapons to point at the Russians put 2 nuclear backfire bombers in Venezuela. They're currently putting together a port in Syria where they've got an aircraft carrier being retrofitted. During the South Ossetia War, they took a couple of top-secret drones, American drones that they captured. They tore them apart, gave them to the Syrians and the Iranians, and they basically said, we'll run any blockade that the United States has against the Iranians. So the bottom line is that every time Putin and the Russians have tried to make peace, the United States has rushed in and put a bunch of guns and bombs and nuclear weapons and pointed them at the Russians. So Putin has said, fine, okay, we'll put nukes back in Cuba and we'll put backfire bombers in Venezuela, and we're still pointing guns at you and see how you feel. By the way, the whole thing in South Ossetia, let me just give you the process of why, if next week, and I say if now because there's the possibility that there may still be a strike on Iran, either before the election, and of course you know, if there's a terrorist attack or if there's an attack on a U.S. ship or a war with the Iranians or they get something going with Iran before the election, you guys realize it'll tip the election in McCain's way. You know that. Every pundit, if you watch Meet the Press, you guys watch the news here, right? Every time they say, oh, Obama's heading the polls, Obama's heading the polls, Obama, 11 points, blah, 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 and they say, well, yeah, what if there's a terrorist attack? And everybody goes, well, then McCain will win. Everybody. I mean, everybody has said that. So it's very interesting because, again, there's only 3 states that McCain has to tip, and he wins by 3 electoral votes. Right? 271 to 276 or something like that. 275. So, and it's also very strange, too. In California, we had a very prominent Afro-American politician in California, Tom Bradley, who ran for governor in California against Pete Wilson. And Bradley was up by 11 points. And he still got his butt kicked. And, he went up, and they were like, oh, we were all surprised because everybody was lying to the pollsters and all this stuff. And he lost by, I think, almost 2 points to Pete Wilson. So they're calling it the Brady bounce. So it ain't over till it's over. Everybody says that it's all... everybody says that it's all going to be Barack Obama. I've said that I always thought it was going to be the Republicans that win the election. The only thing that really surprises me is that there's not some kind of third-party candidate in this election because I did not think the Democrats could win in a fair fight without a third-party candidate. And at the same time, I kept saying there'd be so much economic chaos. You've heard me say this over and over and over again. There'd be so much economic chaos before the election that I did not think that Americans were going to put somebody, either Hillary or Obama, who are, in essence, Fabian socialists, no different from John McCain, I might add, in essence, Fabian socialists in as President of the United States. I just didn't think with the economic chaos. I love Chris Rock, and Chris Rock just did a, have you seen his new, it's HBO special, Kill the Messenger, where he goes, George Bush just messed it up for everybody. White man can't even run for president no more. That's how bad George Bush messed it up for everybody. You got a woman, you got a black guy. He messed it up for all you white people. No white guy can run for president anymore, which I thought was very funny. His one other funny comment, too, was, how do we bust into a country that's got nothing but oil, and oil costs more? He says, I know if I broke into a Kentucky Fried Chicken, that wings would be cheap at my house. And I thought that was just great. Yeah. Chris Rock is a great social prophet. So, yes. Yes, Basil, okay, yes.
The other thing,
second part of your question.
The black money, black money, like, we talk about the...
Black ops stuff?
The poppy seed,
the opium, right.
Opium in Afghanistan, how our government... like how they cook the books. There's
right.
money, you never see that our government is making money.
Right, the whole black ops projects and the black budget and all that.
So when the fellow asks, why is the government still there? Because they can make so much cash money to do things that no one will ever see. They tilt the books and use cash.
Well, it's not just that, but another reason why we went into Iraq is that they're pulling oil. I mean, now Iraq's got a $90 billion surplus. How come they can't defend their own damn selves with that kind of money? We're going into the tank, and they've got all this money going down. The bottom line is what they did is it was never about getting Iraq's oil. It was about keeping Iraq's oil off the market. It's never been about, it's been about keeping Saddam Hussein as a rebel, so his oil is kept off the market, so our oil, the oil we control, becomes more valuable. So the bottom line is we got U.S. troops and Blackwater and contractors in there. What they did is they took Iraqi oil off the meter, is what they call it. So what they do is that they take it off the books, they make it look like there's a shortage, they're pulling it out of the ground for about $5 a barrel, and then at the same time they're selling it at 120, 130, 140, 150 bucks a barrel. There's one other thing too. The primary reason that oil is as high as it is because Congress had a chance before they left for their recess to close what's called the Enron loophole. Have you guys known about this? The Enron loophole is if there's a barrel of oil between two traders, they can trade it back and forth and bid on the same barrel of oil. Oh, I'll bet $60, I'll bet $80, I'll bet $100, I'll bet $120, blah, 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 blah. They can bid back and forth to drive the price of oil up before that oil ever hits the market. So it was speculators that is the reason why oil is so high. That's number one. Number two, in March, Bush went to Prince Bandahar and he said, I want you to increase production by 500,000 barrels a day. And Bandahar said, screw you. The reason oil is so high is because everybody thinks you're going to attack the Iranians before the election. And so speculators are betting on that because if you attack Iran, oil's going to go up to 200 to 250 bucks a barrel, and everybody knows it. Then the Bilderbergers met in June, and they said, enough's enough. We cannot have oil at 150 bucks a barrel. If we have oil that high, it collapses all of our other business. It collapses our trains. It collapses our planes. It collapses our automobiles. They said Americans are a very strange cat. And the minute GM and Ford go down and they have to retool, we're never going to get that market back for oil. We want the price of oil to come down right friggin' now. And they had a conversation with Bandahar, and the next day, Bandahar started pumping an extra 500,000 barrels of oil out of the ground. Meanwhile, the Russians with Medvedev and Putin, Medvedev used to be head of Gazprom in Russia. I'm sorry, I know it's all kind of boring stuff, but he now is planning on selling oil super cheap to Europe, undercutting the Saudi Arabians, which undercuts the United States. So by selling cheap oil to the Europeans at 35, 40 bucks a barrel, that way they get the Europeans hooked on their oil and their natural gas. So if Europe and NATO decide they want to take any actions against Russia whatsoever, they don't have to send a bomb, a gun, or a plane. All they have to do is do this and just turn the valve, and the Europeans freeze to death. And that's what's going on. And that's why you're going to see the price of oil just tank within I think about the next 60 days. Also, when the new Congress comes in, the first thing they're going to have to do is close that Enron loophole. Just by closing the Enron loophole, they could have knocked the price of oil down by almost 60 bucks a barrel because it's all speculative. But remember, Bush still has, let me see, November, December, most of January. He's still got 3 months to do whatever the hell he wants with absolutely no, because the Congress has not held him accountable for anything. So he could still start World War III. Look, I'm just telling you, the guy's insane. I mean, he's nuts, and he's this jacked up coke addict, alcoholic. And look, I'm talking about people that know the guy. All right, it's none of this teetotal stuff. When he was at the Olympics, it was like Girls Gone Wild at the Olympics, man. I mean, they were trying to suppress photos of him throwing up on people and falling down stairs and grabbing volleyball players on the ass. He had this big gash on his arm from tripping and falling down. And it's just his daughter is sitting there with this look on her face like, oh, God, there goes Dad again. Holy cow, I'm so embarrassed. So it's, when you have the military-industrial complex and the Pentagon and all these people on the inside trying to stop this guy from creating Armageddon, I mean, you have a lot of people in the world that are trying to work towards peace. And you got this one guy with Cheney and all his pals who he's like the devil, this guy. And I don't understand any other way to say it. I mean, I didn't like Clinton, but there's a lot of good things that Clinton did when he was in office. I didn't like a lot of these guys. I'm trying to think of a single good thing this guy's done the whole time he's been there. And, even the tax cut put us right back in the pocket of the bankers and destroyed the government. And, I mean, I'm literally racking my brain. Maybe, the Supreme Court justices or, I don't know, whatever. So, yes, sir.
Could you give us any insight on the $700 billion bailout and what it's all about? I mean, as I hear it, the five.
Well, it is insight on the $700 billion bailout. It is what it is. I mean, they're just handing tax money to the banks. It's pretty transparent. It's the only other thing about it was the extra $100 billion that goes into a discretionary fund to be used at the president's discretion, which is like a personal bank account for the president to spend any way he wants, which circumvents the Congress, for him to put troops on the ground anywhere in the United States. So
the way I hear it, this 500 or 600 page bill was sitting on Barney Frank's desk for a couple of months. So who wrote it, who paid for it, and why?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious to everybody here. This was being planned for quite some time. At the same time, they could have bailed out Lehman Brothers. They didn't. These were all emergency plans, if you will. And if you'll notice, when the Bush administration wants to get something done, they panic people and put guns to people's heads because they're masters at creating a Reichstag fire. They're masters at creating, who read the Homeland Security Bill, the 9/11 Patriot Act, before it went through? 1,000 pages of this thing, and they had to pass it in 3 days to basically change. Look, I'm telling you, the Republic as we know it is gone. I mean, if the president, and I've never thought I don't think that Bush is going to declare martial law. I've always thought that whatever he's setting up is designed for whoever the next person that's going to come in is going to handle. And again, it's just interesting. I talked about this yesterday in the workshop. We ran Bible codes on all the candidates. How many people heard this yesterday? Just real quick on the Bible codes, which I think is interesting. A Bible code gives you a prospect. It says if you go down this path, there's a tiger. If you go down that path, there's an elephant. If you go past this path, there's a zebra. So are they valuable? They're valuable in giving us possibilities and prospects. We ran John McCain through the Bible code. It's interesting because if you understand entomology of how words are constructed, the word John in Hebrew means beloved. Mac means son of in Celtic. Cain, actually son of Cain, the first murderer. I think it's interesting. The Republican theme song was, we're all raising Cain. I was like, that's not good, is it? Yay for the murderer. What? Yay, kill your brother. Okay. But actually, Cain in Hebrew actually means spear maker or weapons maker. So it's actually interesting because John McCain means the beloved son of the weapons makers. Isn't that interesting? Barack means blessed in Hebrew. Hussein means light, actually, and I have no idea what Obama means. It's Kenyan or something. But we ran. Do you know what Obama means in Kenyan? Okay. Let me just finish this thought. So we ran McCain through the code, and again, it's possibilities and prospects. It gives us an idea. We ran McCain through the code. It said John McCain, president. He shall rule over them. Heart attack. That's what it said for John McCain. Then we ran Sarah Palin through the code. It was interesting because it said Sarah Palin, she shall have pain in childbirth, which I think referred to her Down syndrome child. It said president, but then it said that was it. Actually, the weird part was if you run her name, it comes up 6 times in the code, and every single time it comes up Palin, and it actually has the word Israel as the I in Palin. So there's something that has to do with Sarah Palin and her interactions with Israel. It also says, it says vice president, then it says president. So something about her destiny become president. We also ran John Edwards through the code. It said John Edwards, vice president, prospect, assassin or assassinate. And of course, John Edwards wasn't made vice president, so that future changes. Although he was politically assassinated, and he was considered as vice president. Then you run Obama through the code. If you run Barack through the code, you come up with end of days 4 times, because Barak, end of days. But there's also Ehud Barak, and the word means, it also means end of days, but God will bless the end of days at the same time. If you run B Obama through the code, it comes up as B Obama, assassin, assassin will assassinate, gunman, riot, panic, replacement, and Tisheroth, actually, which is a month. And Tisheroth is October 30th through November 30th, which I thought was very interesting. So in that aspect. So either way, it seems like if you have heart attack with McCain or assassin will assassinate with Obama, it's just a very interesting, prospects with the code. And once again, we talked about this yesterday in the class, and I'm not going to go through the whole, process of letting you know how this all came out. But if that's true, October 30th through November 30th, let's say, for example, whomever gets in president-elect, and something happens where the president-elect is assassinated, or something happens to the president-elect. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a physical assassination. It could be a political assassination. There's a lawsuit out there that was filed by Philip Berg, and I had a conversation with him on the phone. And you guys can look this up because I sent it out to people on my email list. Philip Berg, in the beginning of September, filed a lawsuit against Barack Obama, Howard Dean, and the Democratic National Committee, claiming that Barack Obama is not a legal citizen of the United States. And there is a body of evidence to support this. He was watching an interview with his grandmother, a 60 Minutes interview, actually, where she's in her house and she's got a pet chicken there in Kenya, talking about how she and some uncles and half-brothers and sisters were there when Obama was born in Kenya. And Philip Berg said, what? What is this? And then he started interviewing some people and said, oh, yes, Barack was born here in Kenya. And the story that came out was his mother, Stanley Ann Dunham, went with his father, Barack Hussein Obama I, from Hawaii when she was about 5 or 6 months pregnant. They went to Kenya. She tried to get back on the plane, and the airline said, we can't have you get back on the plane because you're in the last trimester. You're just too pregnant. And she had Barack Obama in Kenya. Then from Kenya, he moved to Indonesia, became a citizen of Indonesia under his second father. His stepfather there was raised in a Wahhabi school, and as far as we know, he didn't set foot in the United States until he's 10 years old. Then he goes to Pakistan, travels to Pakistan when he's 21. This part he doesn't even deny. Travels to Pakistan when he's 21, but he travels on an Indonesian passport. Article 2, Section 2 says you can't be a dual citizen and be president of the United States, and you have to be a natural-born citizen, which means you have to be born here. Hence, Arnold Schwarzenegger can't be president of the United States because I take my hand. So, get out. So at the end of this month, the judge in the Philadelphia case, and this is all on the internet, because then Berg was demanding that Obama place his birth certificate up on the net. He pasted a certificate of live birth up on the net, not the signed version that has everybody's signature on it, but just a printout of Kalapani Hospital out of Hawaii. And Berg says 3 forensic experts have claimed that the birth certificate is fake, is forged, and he's suing the DNC and Howard Dean for fraud. He's also saying that Barack Obama is guilty of perjury because he was asked on his bar exam, have you been known by any other alias or any other name, and he's been known as Barry Hussein, Barack Dunham. He's had about 12 different names that have been variations of Hussein, Obama, and Dunham, and whatever else. So we'll see. The judge in the case has actually ordered that Barack Obama put his birth certificate up on the internet by the end of the month. There's a possibility that this case before the election could possibly go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, you imagine the chaos would happen if he's elected president, the Supreme Court removes him. Because you know how the Supreme Court's going to rule, right? Because they did something down in Florida. I can't remember what they do in Florida again. I can't remember quite what's going on. So there are political assassinations that could quite possibly occur because under Article 2, Section 2. By the way, just to put you on the other side of this, in order for John McCain to run as President of the United States, McCain wasn't born in the United States either. So he's not a natural-born citizen because McCain was born on a ship passing through the Panama Canal Zone. So they had to pass the McCain resolution in the Senate. This was 6 months ago. They had to pass the McCain resolution in the Senate, where the Senate said it was okay for John McCain to run as president, and he has the blessing of the Senate. And at the same time, the 11th Circuit Court had to rule on it under what they call the Goldwater decision. Barry Goldwater, when he was running in 1964, had to go to the Supreme Court to get permission because Barry Goldwater was born in Arizona when it was a territory, not a state. That's how old Barry. And I think John McCain was born when it was a territory, not a state, too. My Lord. So they had to pass. He had to have an 11th Circuit Court decision, and he had to have a Senate resolution to allow him to run for president of the United States. So it gives you an idea, and there are people behind the scenes who are looking at this going, Joint Chiefs of Staff particularly, who are going, okay, and I'm like, well, why don't you think that anybody's doing about this? I asked one of my sources who seemed to think, well, you know, they did not seem to think that it was going to matter, that he was not going to get in as president, that there were things in the works, or something was going to go on. So I'm just telling you there's stuff going on behind the scenes right now. Let me tell you one other thing before you ask a zillion questions. The last thing about this is when the chaos was going down with the bailout, and one of my sources writes intelligence reports for the House and the Senate Intelligence Committee. When he doesn't have an answer to something, he calls me. That just goes to show they don't know anything that's going on because they got to call me. And they say, well, I'm like, why are you calling me? And they say, well, Sean, you have a tendency to think outside the box. I said, is that just a polite way to say I'm crazy? Is that what I'm like, well, yeah, you've got access to a lot of interesting information. So they called me on the phone, and the first thing they asked me was, again, what would happen if the president-elect between November 4th and January 20th was removed, either through assassination or for politically or whatever else? And once again, I went through this yesterday, and I'll tell you, one answer was they'd have to have the primaries again. Another answer was that the president would declare martial law and would stay in office. All of those are wrong. What would happen is, and this comes from a constitutional law professor at USC, he was like the dean of the law school, but I had to go through like 4 people to get this answer. His answer was, he says the illusion is that the people elect the president. They do not. Who elects the President of the United States? The Electoral College. Of course, you guys know that because you're smart. You live in New York and you all went to private school. So the very, very, very sassy, very smart people. So what happens is that each state nominates a group of electors. Those electors, by tradition, then vote for whoever the majority candidate is. They don't have to, by the way. They are not legally bound to vote for the majority candidate. So if they vote Democrat in Florida, the Electoral College, if they wanted to, those electors could vote Republican if they felt like it. They are literally not legally bound to vote for whoever gets the majority. They do so by tradition. So the bottom line would be is that if the president-elect was removed from office or assassinated or something was to happen to the president-elect, specifically the Electoral College, those electors who have been nominated by the states would meet again, and they would be able to pick anyone they wanted as president. Could be Hillary Clinton, could be John McCain, could be, whomever. So I'm just telling you what the very interesting constitutional conundrums that might come up, because number one, we got Bible codes and stuff on this. Number two, we've got November 27th, Pluto moving into Capricorn, which just has assassination written all over it. Number three, I spent the summer with some of the best astrologers in the world who said, look, we think Barack Obama is going to be president of the United States. And at the same time, he's got death written all over his chart. He's got assassination, whatever else. And another friend would say, look, you can't stand next to that many Kennedys and not expect lightning to strike again. And, and it's sad. I talk to people in California going, who are you going to vote for? I'll vote for Obama, but somebody's going to get him. So it's like, I'm sorry, what? Yeah, so you just create this, and look, I am not saying that this should happen. I pray against it. I didn't like Bush much, and I told a bunch of stuff to the Secret Service back in 2003 that led to them spending millions of dollars on his security. I gave them I gave them as much information as possible, and I said if Bush lived through 2003, that he'd win 2004 in a landslide, that he'd go on to be like the worst president ever, which he was. But my prediction still stands that no matter who gets in, whoever winds up president, it will be nobody anyone expects. Remember seeing that on the radio? I said it's going to be really weird. So there's a good possibility that we wind up with Sarah Palin as president of the United States. So, all right, gentleman in the back had the longest question there. Yes, sir.
Do you think that gold will bounce from 1,200 to 2,000?
No. Do I think that gold will bounce from 1,200 to 2,000? No.
Why not?
Why won't it go to 2,000? There's too much of it. There's just too much of it. What sets the price of gold is the banks. It's not the availability. There's trillions of dollars worth of gold in the world. That's why I said the minute it gets up to $1,000, it's like the speed of light. It just starts to expand exponentially because of all the gold in India. Every woman in India has probably 7 pounds worth of gold just hanging off her. So all these people talking about 2,000. I have never been a gold bug. I work with Swiss America. They've been very supportive of what I do. I started saying gold's going to be a good investment with gold's about 250, 300 because I saw it going to 525. Then I saw it going to 725. Then I saw it going to 9. But I think it's going to bounce off 725, and I think 1,200 is going to be about as high as it's going to go. I've always said the one thing I've always been really bullish on is silver, that you'd see silver start to go down to like 9,875, and then silver, because once again, silver, there's only $200 billion worth of silver in the world. That's it. 200 billion. Bill Gates could, it's not even 200 billion. Yeah, it is. It's 200 billion. Bill Gates could roll over in his sleep and probably buy most of the silver. And Bill Gates, by the way, owns like 30% of the world's silver. Buffett owns something like 15 to 20% of the world's silver. So there's just not that much of it. And there are more industrial applications for silver, number one. Number two, you can only get it by mining it or getting it out of seawater. And number three, the price of silver has to go up because they're not taking out of film, because nobody's using film anymore. Does that make sense? So there's just more silver. I'm sorry, silver is 200 times. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Silver is 200 times more scarce and more valuable than gold. And at current ratios, there is about between 15 and $20 billion worth of silver in the world, not 200 billion. It's 200 times more valuable, but there's between 15 and $20 billion worth of silver worldwide. And as I said, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett own a lot of this. By the way, when Warren Buffett talks, you guys listen, because on 9/11, you know where Warren Buffett was? He was in Omaha at Strategic Air Command with Dick Cheney. So he was in on whatever's going on. So find out what Warren Buffett is buying, because I'm going to find out in the next week and put it in my newsletter, what the hell he's buying. You have a follow-up to the question, which I'll answer?
Just one thing. I don't know the name of the book, but it's going to set to be published about George Bush after the election.
W.
Okay, well, Vince Bugliosi had, trial of George Bush for murder, whatever. And the W movie's pretty funny. I read the script months ago. I think it's a complete cop-out on the part of Oliver Stone, because he just makes it, he totally glosses over any conspiracy to 9/11, any conspiracy about, the line. He makes the whole thing look like it's a pissing contest between W and his dad. And, look, I don't think this man's stupid, all right? Everybody thinks he's just some dumb redneck. I don't think so, because I think he knows exactly what he's doing. And just saying that people in the government are dumb is completely abrogating responsibility for what it is they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing, exactly. And for us to be throwing up our hands going, oh, they're just stupid, they're just dumb, well, who's the stupid one when they're the ones that are always getting away with ripping up the Constitution and taking our government away from us and stealing all our money? Gee, they don't look too stupid to me. It looks like they win in the end. Yes, lovely lady. Yes.
Hi, Sean.
Hi.
I have a question. What are your expectations for the social, economic, and specifically
the housing foreclosure market.
God, I feel like Kennedy up here with these questions. It's like, I think the social market should be. Bobby, you want to take that one? I think I'm going to go. I think I'm going to have Marilyn throw me a birthday party now. I think. Yeah. So what do you think about that, Jackie? I'm sorry. What are the social economic ramifications of my new policies as President of the United States? I'm sorry. What? Channeling Kennedy now. What was that? I'm sorry.
The foreclosure market. What's going to happen to it socially? Your opinions. What do you think?
The foreclosure market, I've pretty much been on record on that over and over and over again. I said a year ago the foreclosure market was going to reach something like 70%. Mr. Norrie, in his inimitable style, laughed in my face when that happened, and now we're about there. I said the markets were going to collapse, and we would see the markets go first to about 9,200 or so. He again laughed in my face. This is when the markets were at 13,000 or whatever. I said the markets were going to go to 14,005. He laughed in my face. I get a lot of laughing in my face, and I got to wipe my face off a lot because people laugh at it. And what do I do? And by the way, they never come back and apologize when I turn out to be right in the end either. This is what it's going to be. It's shaken out. I mean, it's shaken out. What's going to happen is industry doesn't go anywhere. Warren Buffett's absolutely right. You want some deals within about the next 60 days. Cash is going to be king. I've been saying to everybody, pay off your debt, get out of debt, get cash, sock the cash away, because there's going to be fantastic deals on real estate, because from this point on, it's going to start building itself back up. I mean, I'd also point out that the stock market traditionally, over the course of the 20th century, has done better under Democrats than Republicans. As weird as that sounds, we've had usually yearly gains of under Republicans between 7 and 9%, and under Democrats between 14 and about 16%. You can look that up. That's a fact. What the country likes is divided government. So the perfect storm occurred in the 90s when you had a Democratic president with a Republican House and primarily Republican Senate. It went back and forth. That's perfect. The markets love that because it means nothing gets done. Now if you have a Democratic president, that's true. You have a Democratic president, possibly, with a democratically controlled House or whatever, I don't think it's going to last long. Because I think once, let's say, I'll give you the examples here. If McCain gets in with this, the whole warfare thing, if you will, he's going to spend more money on bombs, guns, planes, and what have you. He's going to cut some taxes. I don't think the taxes will go up, which I think is proper, because when Roosevelt raised taxes in the 30s, it just made things worse. Also, notice that the biggest swings up and down in the stock market were during the Depression, 1931, 32, 33. We saw swings in the market at 12%, 14%, 17%. The European stock market has dropped by close to almost 26% or so. I mean, that's where they've gone. So the socio-political economic aspects of this are, you're seeing in mass, people are starting to move away from the coasts, where real estate has become untenable, where they've been foreclosed on. They're moving into the middle part of the country. They're moving to Houston, Salt Lake, Salt Lake City. Here's the other interesting part about this. I mean, I'm working on a book now that I hope to get done called, I think it's kind of funny, The Future Sucks and How to Not Get Sucked Down with It, which, and what we're looking at is that when you really think about it, the people with the most successful mythology, I would call it religion, but mythology, win in the end. For example, if you look at the mythology scale, the people that will succeed the best, most successful mythology, and my wife is their queen because she comes to Salt Lake City, are the Mormons. I mean, I'm not Mormon. My wife is raised Mormon. Her mother and father are like kings and queens of the Mormons. But they believe in guns, and they get 2 years of food, and they have a community there. And if you look at the other end of that spectrum, the least successful mythology is going to be the born-again Christian rapturists, because they think that Jesus is just going to come up and get them, and we're all just going to disappear, and all you evil people are going to be here, and the devil's just going to roast you over a spit while they're up on a cloud having a party with Jesus somewhere. Literally. And that aspect of irresponsibility also says, well, we don't have to give a crap about the planet or about our relationships or about making things better, because we're just going to get caught up in the air with Jesus when he comes back. So they don't have anything ready. So the idea is going to be that people who can come together and say, look, there's going to be some hard times ahead. We better get some food. We better get some guns. We better get some ammo. The 4 Gs, God, guns, gold, and groceries, as they say. I'm a big fan of that stuff. I'm a Second Amendment guy. I'm a constitutionalist. I'm all about freedom. I mean, all this right-wing and left-wing stuff is just nonsense. It's are you free or aren't you to do what you want? But freedom demands responsibility. And if you have an irresponsible society, then you need laws to control people that are irresponsible. Yes, ma'am?
You mentioned that there was going to be a lot of problems in the market this week that was going to
that I think.
Yeah, that's the chart that I just ran up there. So, watch, I mean, if that chart's right, all I can say is if you see the market go to, let's call it 72 to 74,000, run. Just run. Run. Because if it hits, sell. Get the hell out. Because if that happens, then the next resistance line is 5,000. 72 to 74,000. 100, I'm sorry.
What about the savings account?
Sorry, what?
Savings bank and
nobody has under. I mean, nobody's lost a dime really in the banks. It's all been covered by FDIC. But again, it's they just print it. It's worth nothing. It's like I said, it's not backed by anything. So yes, our lovely volunteer in the back in the purple shirt. Yes, ma'am.
So our Constitution says that when the government no longer serves the people, we have the right to abolish it. How do we take our?
I don't know if the Constitution. I think Jefferson said that. I'm not sure the Constitution says that. But go ahead. Okay, whole other thing. Okay, but yeah. Do we have the right to abolish it? Yeah, but just try it sometime. Yeah, it's a great concept, but
You said that you're in favor of freedom of the people and it requires responsibility. So I'm asking, how do we as a people take our power back?
The best way to do it is when you're sovereign, you just have to act sovereign, and if you don't know how to defend your rights, you don't have any rights. So it means knowing how to defend yourself in court, knowing how to talk to police officers, knowing how to get straight with your status. That's a fantastic question, and it's a whole other seminar. So I mean, the other seminar has to do with there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can declare sovereign citizenship and actually revoke your federal citizenship, which takes you out of their jurisdiction, and become a sovereign citizen in the state of New York. You can become what's called a secured party creditor, which means you take back the title to your name, because they use your name in all capital letters to basically pull you into the corporatocracy to claim that you're under business. You can become an ambassador for a foreign nation state. I don't have my ID on me, but we started our own country called the Dominion of Melchizedek in the 1990s. And the Dominion of Melchizedek, we got about 3,700 citizens. It costs like $2,500 to become a citizen. Ambassadorial credentials run about $10,000. But it makes you immune from prosecution. You get an international driver's license. It's fantastic for travel, all kinds of things. Dual citizenship was, by the way, approved by the Supreme Court. In the late 1980s, they approved dual citizenship. If your parents or grandparents were foreign nationals, you can submit their birth certificates and become dual citizens of the country. Then the Israelis tried to do it, and they got upset because they were denied. Of course, they have no access to lawyers in the legal system whatsoever. They all went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said if you claim a nation state as your spiritual homeland, like the Israelis did, they granted them dual citizenship status so that American Jews, I don't know what you get, like a note from your rabbi, or you got to show them your circumcision or something, and it's something. But you got to prove you're Jewish, and you can then be a dual citizen of the United States and Israel. By the way, Michael Chertoff is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. Paul Wolfowitz is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. R.V. Fleischer is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. Joe Lieberman is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. It goes on, and everybody George Bush has surrounded himself with is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizenship. Don't you think? Do you think if Bush was surrounded by a bunch of Germans and he started attacking Poland and Czechoslovakia, that people would get a little suspicious? But that's just my opinion. And so what happens is that we now, there's only one guy that got that joke, that you folks on the internet are laughing, I know. So with the Dominion of Melchizedek, right now we're working on getting our country code, but as a foreign ambassador, you come under the United Nations and Viennese Council of Diplomatic Relations of 1962 and the Consular Relations of 1964. Is this enough for you guys? Wow, he's got a big brain. How does he remember all that stuff? You also get to eat at the Ambassador's Lounge at the UN really cheap. That's the only other advantage. You can turn in your driver's license, and once we get our country code, you'll be able to actually get diplomatic plates issued by the State Department. You'll be able to take your ambassadorial appointment, turn that into county supervisor, and get your house completely tax-free as a diplomatic mission. And the bottom line is you can't be pulled over, you can't be stopped, and any action taken against you by a state, local, or federal official is considered an act of war. How's that? So that's a whole other thing. That takes you completely out of their game, because we got sick of going into court and having judges say, if you quote the Constitution to me again, I'll throw you in jail for contempt. Because again, the Constitution doesn't apply to you. It's a compact between the states and the feds, not you. You are owned because you're debtor slaves rather than what we call secured party creditors, which is a whole other... I walk into a court of law and they say, what's your name? And I say, it's Sean David Morton in all capital letters or whatever else. I walk into a court and say, I am the secured party creditor and third party intervener for the corporate fiction that's been created of Sean David Morton. That's an entirely different conversation with anybody associated with the law, because it means that you reserve all your rights and privileges, not them. Because when you go into court, they're basically saying, well, you're a debtor and you owe money, which means we can do anything we want to you. We can fine you without a jury trial. We can take your money without a jury trial because you're a slave. We already own your ass. I mean, I talked to black churches in Los Angeles. They get it, man, because slavery never ended. They said they didn't end slavery. They said, that's cool. Show us how to do that to everybody. And that's exactly what they did. That's what the 14th Amendment was. The federal government bought the slave contracts at the time under the 14th Amendment and then created a second class of citizen that they call U.S. federal citizens. So what you are is you've been completely disenfranchised because you are resident aliens of the sovereign states. When did you become... like, for example, remember when you see anybody on the TV and it's a guy standing up in New York or whatever else, they always say resident? You know what a resident is? A resident means you can't own property or guns or anything else. A resident means you don't have any rights. Why aren't you a citizen of New York? You're a citizen of the United States of America Incorporated, which only consists of 10 square miles of Washington, D.C., American Samoa, Puerto Rico, Guam, post offices, and military bases, and you become then a resident of the sovereign state of the Republic of New York. Exactly like if I was Irish, I'd be a citizen of Ireland, but living in the United States, I would basically be a resident of the United States of America, but a citizen of Ireland. Does that make sense? So they created an entire second class of citizen, conned you all into thinking you're all federal citizens under federal jurisdiction, and then tricked you with the Social Security card, and then you pay taxes, and it says voluntary income tax right at the top of the form, and you sign it and volunteer to pay your taxes. So all these boneheads like Wesley Snipes and all these other guys that jump up and down and say, oh, I shouldn't have to pay my taxes, I shouldn't have to pay my taxes. And I say, well, if you go in and join the Marine Corps or join the Army and you sign a piece of paper and then you don't show up, what do? You go to prison. They come and get you. If you sign a piece of paper that says you agree to pay taxes and you volunteer and you don't pay them, what do? So what you have to do is you have to revoke those documents. You have to revoke those documents and write letters saying, I was tricked, this is fraud, I didn't realize I was giving up my rights, blah, 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 blah. But you got to be smart. You got to, there is no freedom without knowledge. There is no freedom without knowledge. If you want to be a slave, be stupid. And there's all kinds of people that are more than happy to be stupid and be slaves. It's really easy. They make it easy. They make it easy because they offer you the easy way. You want the easy way? Get this license, get this thing, sign this deal. Oh, we'll make it easy for you. So, believe me, it's tough. You gotta think your way out of a lot of stuff. But people who think are dangerous, and that's why they don't want anybody thinking. Conform, control, consume. So, all questions. Yes, lovely lady.
Can you answer?
You guys okay? Are you guys bored? Am I? No. You guys okay? All right. Because the 11th commandment is thou shalt not bore an audience. I just don't want to suck up here. All right, so.
I have a couple of questions. The first is just going on what you're going to speak on tonight.
Right.
It says the 144,000 and the coming of the Messiah.
The 144,000, the coming of what?
The Messiah.
And the coming of the Messiah. Yes. You want me to talk on that?
Yeah, I want to know what that is. And also,
wait. Just let me answer one question at a time. Okay. So the 144,000. Where does that come from? Interestingly enough, the Jehovah's Witnesses. Like Prince, Prince is Jehovah's Witness now. The funny part is Prince is actually, I'm not kidding, he's actually knocking on people's doors, proselytizing in Beverly Hills. And people open the door and they go, there's nobody there. Oh, hey, how you doing? Yeah, in his assless pants and all that. No, he's a Jehovah's Witness now. The Jehovah's Witnesses believed that the world was going to end in 1914, and that only, this is what's really funny, they only believe 144,000 people are going to heaven. Well, why would you be knocking on people's doors trying to get more people into your religion? Wouldn't it suck if suddenly you die and it's like you're 144,001 and it was the guy whose door you just knocked on? It's like you're standing in line going, what? What do you mean I'm going to hell? Yeah, buddy, thanks for saving me. Hey. The 144,000 concept, which is 12,000 times 12,000, or 12 times 12,000, comes from the book of Revelation. It talks about the 144,000 will be activated as the multitude of the warriors in white, is what they call it. That the 144,000 people go through, for lack of a better term, an activation. Supposedly there's people in the end times, let's just take the Bible now. In the end times, supposedly, you have the 666, and the 666 is the mark of the beast. And the mark of the beast goes on the back of the hand or the forehead, and it's actually it's actually interesting, because if you read Revelation 22, which is where all the beast and the Antichrist and the false prophet stuff comes about, a lot of this is a reaction because God orders the angels, the harbingers of destruction, to release the vials and seals and bowls upon the earth, of which there's 7 of each one of these. You with me so far? So what happens is then the Antichrist and the false prophet or the beast then start doing the coding system of it shall be the mark of a man, 666 to wear on the back of the hand to the forehead. On the other hand, you have the angelic aspect where there seems to be the children of God who then have a mark that's the 777. This is also mentioned as well. That's also on the forehead or the back of the hand. So it's an interesting thing where the children of God have 777s, the children of Satan have the 666. The 144,000 are then somehow activated. This could be a DNA activation. And it then says, multitudes and multitudes dressed in white follow them. So it's not just 144,000. You have to imagine it's 144,000 Gandhis or Buddhas or Christs or Mother Teresa's or, I'm sorry?
They're virgins. Must be virgins.
They're virgins? Well, I guess that counts you out, Basil. Boy, I guess nobody's going to survive. It doesn't say they're virgins in the Bible, by the way. It doesn't say they're virgins. Hold on one second. Let me finish. Let me get your questions real quick. So the bottom line is that at the end of time, supposedly, the army in white, led by the 144,000 with the multitudes upon multitudes, are supposedly there when the Christos returns on a beam of light on a white horse with faithful and true written upon his thighs, with a crown with a name no man is known, and they fight the last battle against the kings of the east, which is an assembled army of 200 million or so, and that's the battle of Harmageddo. So that's the biblical version of it. The other version, my opinion of it is, I think that's about right. But I think, my personal opinion, I think the Valley of Harmageddo, I think that battle happens here in the United States, and I think it happens in the West, and I think it happens with the last big war. What I've seen in the future, my opinion could change, could shift. But when I went to 100 years from now, in a remote viewing to sort of change places to do a post-life progression, I try to figure out, if I went to the future, what's the history of mankind look like? And when I did that in 1994, there's another book that we're working on called the Vajra Chronicles, which describes what the future's like in the year 2096. The calendar changes in 2034. The Christ does return, but in the body of the twin flame, because it's actually a woman who rules the planet at that time called the Emanuela. And there's a great battle that takes place between the United States, Canada, mostly North America, and an invading Chinese army that comes down through Alaska and comes down through Canada and whatever else. But there's one last big battle that takes place, and the final place is not the Mount of Olives and is not the Holy Land, is not the Middle East, but actually the final battleground is actually fought in Denver, Colorado. And my projections had been that we would see the United States Capitol move from Washington, D.C. to Denver. That's already happening because the EPA is moving there, the Internal Revenue Service is moving there. That's why they built that giant airport, by the way. Why they spent like an extra $20 billion or whatever it is on that big airport. Which, by the way, if you've ever been to DIA or DOA, as they jokingly call it, if you look at it from the air, it looks like a giant swastika, which is really interesting because that's the airport that was built. That was the Silverado bank scandal that McCain was involved with, and that bank was actually that was Neil Bush. That was GW's little brother. Was involved in that bank scandal where they overspent by all that money because they built the whole airport 20 levels down, so it interconnects with NORAD, Strategic Air Command, Area 51, the Dulce Mesa. It interconnects with all this stuff. The reason it's on that plane way outside of Denver is because you could bivouac 200,000 troops and basically turn it into the federal capital of the United States within 48 hours. And Denver is the secondary federal capital of the U.S. Should something happen to D.C., the entire, what they call COG, which is continuative government, would automatically move to Crystal Palace, which is Colorado Springs. It would actually move to Denver. And my visions of the future is that we actually do, and this is from 94, mind you. In 1994, I said that in 2001 that there would be terrorist attacks on New York City and Washington, D.C., that they would be we wouldn't really know who was behind it, but it was something called the Islamic Jihad at that time, that the federal capital, that there would be subsequent attacks actually on Washington, D.C., that the capital would be moved to Denver, that we would see states of martial law in the 2006 to 2010 timeframe, that you would see revolution in the United States in that timeframe as well, that the federal government would start sending troops against people. You'd see civil war in the U.S. right in this timeframe, and everything that I can see. The only thing that hasn't happened from the Vajra Chronicles was... the reason I call it Vajra Chronicles is because I've done past life regressions, and in my next life, I incarnate in a community somewhere in Omaha, Nebraska. And my name is Vajra Morton, and I incarnate as one of my great-grandchildren, way down the pipe there. And so I tried to go to 100 years from now to look back on what's going on. It's really a fantastic world, too, because most of the planet is at peace, and there is an actual messianic figure that comes at that time. And, of course, my opinion is a lot different than what the fundamentalist aspect of it is, but this has a lot to do with all the calendars starting over in the year 2034 and great earthquakes that occur in the middle part of the United States in 2011 and 2012, a meteor that fragments and strikes in 3 sections of the western United States in 2010, the war with the Chinese, and actually the Chinese, the prediction in '94 was the wars in the Middle East would so weaken the United States and our military and our economy that we would see an economic collapse due to the wars. That's now happened. And that we would not be able to stop the rise of China. And China would then gain an influence over Japan, over Korea. It would start buying up sections of Canada. It would start buying up Australia. And that they would become a superpower, begin to rival the United States. Nobody thought this was possible in '94. At the same time, in the Vajra Chronicles, he said that World War III would begin when Pakistan attacked India with nuclear weapons. And in '94, the Pakistanis had as much chance of developing nuclear weapons as 10,000 monkeys writing Shakespeare. It was that. And then in '98, of course, they developed nuclear weapons, and they got a cruise missile from the United States when it didn't go off, when Clinton attacked Pakistan. So everything's fallen into place. The only thing that hasn't happened was Vajra said that there would be a Red Mercury dirty bomb nuclear attack on D.C. that would happen sometime in around the 2006 timeframe. But once again, he states over and over and over again, my future, you can change whatever my future is. If you changed an event in the past, my future would be different and I wouldn't even know it, because that's just the way timelines actually work and function. But the big stuff that was talked about at that time, that's why we're so desperate to get it all down in a book and do the research and do whatever, because it's of interest to people, because it really does. This was something I just did a trance channel, and people were asking questions in an audience like this, and this came out in like a 4-hour session with people just blindly asking questions, over the course of this. So this was something I wasn't even expecting. I went there in the meditation, and it was kind of like waking up in somebody's house in the middle of the night, and kind of scaring everybody. But the population of the planet was about 1.8 billion or so. There had been a big plague that had killed a lot of the men. Polygamy was an accepted lifestyle just because there just weren't enough guys to go around, basically.
That's the 5th G.
What's that?
That's the fifth G.
The 5th G, whatever that means. That's good work. Good work if you get it, I guess. But no, it was just a very interesting. They were just trying to repopulate the world, and there was a woman who ran a loosely confederated world government called the Emanuela, and she came in 2034. Was born in 2034, came into power as a child in about 2039, 2040. She had access to all of her past lives. She could work. She showed us to Atlantean technology, matter transmission. Things came out of the pyramid and underneath the Sphinx that she could work. It was remarkable. And she lives to be, as far as we know, she lives to be about 120 years old. And then after that, her spirit goes, leaves us for about 20 years, and then another Messianic figure returns after that. There's a process of 4 more. It's the return of Christ, but in the physical bodies, the essence of the Christos in the body, exactly like Christ came the first time in the body of a physical person. And then we have these Christed entities that rule the planet for about the next 500 years or so, which is called the Messianic Age. So that's my opinion and theory on all this, and we can talk about that. Yes, sir.
What do you know about chemtrails?
Chemtrails is a whole other lecture. The only reason I don't talk too much about it is it's really complicated. When chemtrails started actually they started I think about January of '98, I believe it is. The only reason it's difficult because every time they've actually gotten a hold of the stuff, it's been something different. On one hand, at the beginning, the chemtrails seemed to be, it was actually what they called spirochetes, which seemed to be a form of syphilis. And syphilitic spirochetes are actually used as part of an anthrax vaccine. So there was the possibility that they were actually, there was the possibility that the bad guys, or should I say the global government upstairs, was afraid of what they viewed as a global plague of some kind. So if you don't take the aspect that they're all just Ernst Stavro Blofeld and all just James Bond villains and they're all just trying to kill us all, if there's something to this, and in California, the chemtrails stopped about 8 months ago. I think they didn't have the gas to put in the planes. I think it just became too expensive because we haven't had chemtrails in Los Angeles for almost the better part of a year. You guys still have them here in New York, though, quite a bit. All I can tell you is that it changes. The different reports have been that, once again, there have been syphilitic spirochetes that are usually used as an anthrax vaccine. There's been certain types of flu virus that have been put in it. There's a polymer, like a glue, that's actually in it that gets into the upper lungs and flattens or destroys the cilia in the upper respiratory system, which would be phase one. Almost like you know how when you use an epoxy glue, you've got actually two chemicals, an A and a B agent? It's always been my opinion that whatever it is they're doing is that they're actually prostrating the global population by destroying the health, the immune system, and the cilia in the top of the lungs. You know, how many people knew when they were chemtrailing because you wake up in the morning with that weird cough in your throat, that kind of like, what we call the chemtrail hack, like a weird tightness in the throat? I could tell. I would wake up, my wife would wake up, and the next morning I'd be like, and I'd look outside, and they were just chemtrailing the snot out of everybody at night, and they usually always do it right before it rains or right before a big fog. So when it's real hot, the chemtrails will start going around because then the fog then disperses the stuff. It could be spirochetes. Some of it was actually tracked to Dr. James Baker at the University of Michigan. He ran the nanotechnology division there. So if this stuff is nanotechnology, holy cow! I mean, that just goes off the chart. I mean, let me give you my aluminum foil hat take on this. If they're spraying nanotechnology, number one, they can do what they call spy dust, which means that they can actually take a trail of that energy, run an electrical charge through it, and use it as a communications antenna. At the same time, they can coat an entire town, run an EM pulse through it, and actually completely map a town or a city and use it as part of a holographic projection, as part of a battle or combat simulation. It's really complicated because also when you look at the way the military has put this together, if you're running a combat simulation, they actually use computers that they call BEAST computers. And BEAST computer stands for Battle Engagement Arena Simulation and Tracking. And the BEAST computers then relate to something they call the MARC, which is the Multiple Automated Readout Computer Chip. And that's usually placed in, if you're Special Forces, it goes in the neck right by the carotid artery right here. If you're anybody else, they usually put it in the buttock. Like Timothy McVeigh, the reason they put it in the neck right here is it's got a small corrosive acid in it. So if you're doing what they call a wet work operation and you're sent into another country and you're captured, by the way, they use this in Mission Impossible. Do you ever see Mission Impossible 1, 2, and 3? What they do is it's got a corrosive acid. They can hit a button, the capsule explodes, it eats into the carotid artery, and it just floods your head, and you have instant deniability as far as an assassin or anybody that does wet work stuff for the government. So it's interesting that they also call that system a tessera system, or what they call and the tessera system is a piece of a mosaic, which is what they used in Roman times to control slaves. A piece of a mosaic was actually called the tessera, and the tessera actually is like a dog tag, an electronic dog tag. And if you have the chip and you're wounded in battle, they can evac you in a MASH helicopter, and they can take like a laser gun, like in a store, and they just go and they hit it, and up on a computer screen they'll just go, okay, you got a broken bone, you're allergic to peanuts, you got a penicillin challenge, They have your whole medical history right there. So that's what they were using it, and this is what they're introducing through a company in Florida called Digital Angel, which is the new chip that they're now demanding for all your pets. And next it's going to be your kids, and next it's going to be grandma and grandpa, because they have Alzheimer's and they wander off, and that's how they're going to help you with it. And what the chip is going to be offered, we're the government, we're here to help. The chip is going to be offered as like a gold card, because if you get a chip in your hand, you'll be able to scan it. You'll go right past the line. They're already doing the clear cards, where you can actually pay an extra $100 and they can check your security background. You don't have to go through the scanning line at the airports.
Yeah, they started advertising for that.
Yeah, what's going on now? And so, all this is happening. So, as far as the chemtrails go, it's a biological weapon. It's a tool. It's nanotechnology. It's got military applications. It's a bunch of different stuff. So it's not just one. It's not just one thing. It's really complicated. They were blasting a town in Canada so much. Part of what it was doing, it was creating temporary Alzheimer's. People were going out and they'd forget where their cars were parked. They would have short-term memory loss. Because and also one other thing too is a lot of people believe that the reason there's such a gigantic surge in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and also possibly in childhood autism as well, is because this stuff has aluminum in it. And the aluminum actually gets into, the shards actually get up into your brain, and they short-circuit your brain, because you've seen the Alzheimer's numbers go up. Alzheimer's was like unknown, 15, 20 years ago. Now it's like everybody has this stuff. And, short-term memory loss.
So what is their objective? Is it population control? Is it more?
I don't know. Look, it's not like they call me on the phone and say, hey, Sean, here's what's going on. Go tell the people what our evil plan is today. I got to think and kind of figure this stuff out.
You would know more California than anybody else.
There is the possibility, hold on one second, there is the possibility, as I said, if it's phase 1, if it's a polymer to destroy the immune system in the upper lungs, that they could use it as crowd control, and they could then introduce something into the population, a plague, if you will, a flu, which could actually, which could subdue an entire population. They have sonics now that they use in most of our embassies. They call them barf boxes, whereas if you attack an embassy in a foreign land, attack an embassy in a foreign land, they flip a switch, and it hits the inner ear, and you start walking around a circle and start throwing up. And for a 6-block radius, you're just like, ugh, and they make these things in Mountain View, California. They also have boxes that they sell to corporations that make you kind of happy at the same time, that actually give off a wave or a sonic frequency that just kind of puts you in that, Brave New World kind of drone-like state. I mean, it's, once again, consume, control, conform. I mean, they just want to numb you. They want to dumb you down. And I don't know why they need all this, because they've got television for that. So it's like, actually, basically, guys, you asked all these questions. Let me get some other people with questions. Yes, sir. Yes.
Do you know anything about the empty prison camps in the United States?
Do I know anything about the prison camps in the United States? I'm asked this over and over and over again. Alex Jones jumps up and down about it. Love Alex Jones. And I don't get it, because we have more people in prison per capita than any other country in the world. We have more people in prison than China. And China's got a population, what, 1.3 billion or 5 or something? We have close to, do you realize that we have somewhere between, we have close to 2% of our male population is in jail. Close to 7% of our male population is on parole or has been convicted of something. So we have more people in prison than anywhere else in America. And let me get this straight. All these people that think there's going to be martial law and they're going to round people up and put people in camps. Why? It's expensive. Martial law is expensive. As long as you're working every day inside the matrix, as long as you're not disrupting the matrix, as long as you're not reaching into the code and messing with anything, they're not going to do anything. But when there's civil unrest, when there's riots in the streets, when Pluto moves into Capricorn, which is what they're expecting, and look, everything I'm telling you about the astrological stuff, about the cycles, about the Mayan calendar, I talk to these guys in the military, and there's no other way to put this. They know all this shit. All this stuff. I'm dumb compared to these guys. I am dumb compared to them, because they're thinking 10, 15, 20, 25, 50 years down the line. And I'm thinking, I'm trying to figure out how to pay my rent next month, and these guys, they're talking about, well, there's going to come a time when the planet gets colder, we're going to have to move an Asiatic Caucasian population down from the northern climates down to the equatorial zones, which means we're going to have to get rid of the surplus population. Well, what does that mean? That means they're going to have to kill indigenous people and blacks and whatever else, and anybody that lives along the equator, to be able to move what they see as a Caucasian and Eurasian population, Asian Caucasian population, down when the planet gets colder. We're going through a global warming period of time right now, which is going to go to a global cooling. Although I think a lot of this green technology and a lot of the stuff, which is going to be the next big thing, green technology will outstrip IT technology in about 4 years, and it's going to be the next big industrial phase or fad. The reason it's being so touted by the Bilderbergers and the New World Order guys is because it gives them an excuse for a global government. Gives them an excuse for global government and global control and global taxes, which is what they've been trying to do forever. Also, the economic collapse right now, what are they talking about? They're talking about global controls on the economy. Handing stuff over to the United Nations or whomever else. So a lot of this is fixed. At the same time, every crisis comes with an opportunity. So as far as the camps go, yeah, they're out there, but the majority of the stuff, when I've actually gone there, I talked to a guy that FEMA rents his whole back 40 up in Simi Valley, and they've got 2 big ditches up there. And I said, why is FEMA renting this property? And he said, they told me it's just in case there's a plague and they have to do something with bodies, or there's some kind of atomic or a terrorist attack or something, and they have to dump bodies in these big ditches. This is a guy that actually gets a check from FEMA, the only person I found. Do they have concentration camps set up somewhere? Yeah, but we're building prisons faster than we can make them too. The prison business is also a very good deal. They like to get women in prison because women stay longer because they make better workers. And at the same time, once you are in bondage, it means that they carry a bond against you, which they borrow against. You know who owns more prisoners in the United States than anybody? Walmart. Walmart, because they buy the bonds on the prisoners. And they sell them over and over and over and over again, just like a commodity, just like a derivative. So they have a vested interest in the prison industry to get people into prison, which is a slave population, which then competes with the Chinese and the Mexicans and whatever else, and they make money off you because now that you're in bondage, you have a bond on you, they actually loan that equity out. So it's all, do they want to get more people in prison? Yes. At the same time, if you're in the matrix and you're behaving yourself, there's no reason for them to do whatever it is they're going to do. It's these people that say, oh, they're just going to wipe out the world and they're going to kill 4 billion people. Why? It's like two guys that own a plantation saying, well, let's go get some shotguns and, shoot everybody out picking cotton. What for? If they're your property, I hate to use that analogy, but it's the only way I can do it. Your property, you're just going to go blow everybody's brains out? No. If you're working for them and you're their slaves and you're just all happy in the field, then why? But if you're useless, here's the only other way that I can see it. If we develop a type of technology where machines build the machines build the machines. I tell people, would you really be surprised if I told you that Sarah Connor, or if I told you that Hillary Clinton was in fact a Terminator robot that was sent by Skynet from the future to kill John Connor? You'd go, yeah, that makes kind of sense. I think, yeah, that sounds about right. Or sometimes people believe anything. But if we have a thing where machines build the machines build the machines, and we no longer need this workforce anymore, and we now have what Hitler called the useless eaters, then yeah, you wipe out populations because they're sitting on natural resources that you want. Why wipe out Africa? Why introduce the AIDS virus into Africa? They've killed 200 million people in Africa through starvation, through war. And by the way, when the next set of wars come, Africa's going to be the battleground. Because right now, the warlords in Africa who've been kidnapping these kids at 8, 9, 10 years old and turning them into savage killers, these kids are now 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. There's an army in the heart of Africa that numbers in about the range of about 3 million or so. That's going to be one of the most savage armies on the planet. What are they going to do with them? And the Chinese are all good buddies with all these people in China in the middle of it. A lot of it has to do with what's going on with coltan. And I mentioned coltan and nobody knew what I was talking about. Then they did. I talked about it on the radio a bunch of times, saying coltan is going to be this element that everybody's going to try to get because you can't build computers without it. And then they do a whole Sarah Connor Chronicles episode on Fox about these robots from the future trying to get a supply of coltan to build the Skynet computers, which I think is interesting because you can't build video games, you can't build computers without coltan. And the only place you can get it is the center part of Africa. And there's these big wars now going on over not only blood diamonds, but coltan. So why kill 200 million people in Africa? The reason would be is that if the planet's going to get colder in 10, 15, 20, 30 years, then do you think all the Caucasians and all the people in England and Northern Europe with all the money and all the weapons and all the guns and all the technology, you think they're just all going to freeze to death? No, they're going to move to Africa. And what are they going to do? Well, there's people who live there. What do? You kill them all. And the only way to wipe them out is with a plague. And now, one last thing, the Council on Foreign Relations actually put together a paper which was called Project for an American 21st Century. Look it up on the net. You guys need to read this. And to my horror, they showed one of Barack Obama's speeches, and Barack Obama is saying, we together can make America, can make it an American 21st century, which is like a code word that not only has he read the paper, but he kind of agrees with what's going on. And it just made my skin crawl because I've read the Project for American 21st Century, and part of it talks about the development of genetic weapons to wipe out China. Actually, gene bombs or flus like SARS or whatever else that are genetically specific to wipe out China. They published this paper in China, and it almost started a war with the Chinese. They were pissed off, and they were jumping up and down going, oh, is this what you're going to do? Genocide against the entire Chinese people? And this now led, and you can read all about this, there's a guy by the name of Benjamin Fulford, and Kerry Cassidy, and it was in Nexus Magazine over the past 3 months. Kerry Cassidy and Bill Ryan did an interview with Ben Fulford. Benjamin Fulford is the only white man who's now been initiated in 500 years, has been initiated into the red and green Chinese tongs, and he's now the finance commissioner for Japan. It's one of the reasons why the yen is going up and everything else is tanking. But Ben Fulford, he's a British writer who actually headed the Asian desk for Forbes magazine, gave this entire scenario about how the Bilderbergers came about and how the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers came about and how now there's a third player in all this called the red and green Chinese tongs. And the tongs have said to the Illuminati, there's 6 million of us and there's about 10,000 of you. If you think you're going to mess with the election, kill Obama or McCain or Ron Paul or whatever else, and if you think you're going to start developing these genetic weapons to take out China, here's the deal. There's 10,000 of you. We know where you live. We know who you are. There's 6 million of us, and we live in the shadows. And in 24 hours, we can wipe you off the face of the earth. You want to play? And ever since then, it's been this standoff between what's going on with the Illuminati and the Bilderberger guys and the red and green tongs. So now these blocks of power are appearing. You've got the North American Union, North and South America. You've got Europe. You now have Russia that's now completely outside the loop with Putin. You've got China that is straining at the end of the leash. I mean, still the Illuminati still controls because of the communist systems in China, but they're starting to get out of the box. They're losing control. And the opportunity that's going to come along is that you may have a third force come in that's going to vie for peace. And again, I think, and let me just state, I know this sounds like a lot of bad news at the same time. My opinion is that they beat into your head kind of in the New Age the whole theory of the 100th monkey. You guys know the 100th monkey theory? Everybody knows that. All I can tell you is that from my standing here, 100th monkey is a lie. It's fake. It's a joke. It doesn't work. The theory of the 100th monkey is one monkey takes a dirty potato and starts washing the dirty potato in the river, and then another monkey sees him doing it, starts washing that potato, and then when 100 monkeys see that monkey doing it, suddenly it begins to jump to another island because that monkey does it, right? That's not how it works in the real world. If that was how it worked, what really happens, if that was how it worked, Nikolai Tesla would be the king of the world, and we would have flying cars, and there wouldn't be any disease, because we'd all go, wow, we're going to do what the smart monkeys do. You know what really happens? One monkey takes a potato and he starts washing it. Then the Dick Cheney of monkeys over here takes a look at that guy and goes, hey, what's that monkey doing? He's messing with my dirty potato consortium. Quick, everybody get sticks and kill the smart monkey. And they beat that monkey till he's dead. That's what really happens in the modern world. But what's going to happen, and this is what the Mayan calendar talks about, what's going to happen is, as the earth itself begins to evolve, or what they call the world tree, as it opens and closes and expands with thoughts, and all of us are part of that neural net in the world tree, that what happens is that all the monkeys get the idea to wash all their potatoes all at the same time. So it's not a 100th monkey theory, it's a natural evolving process of the earth. So when I talk about all these systems falling apart, and when I talk about the social stuff, and I talk about the Russians, and I talk about the United States and the Bilderbergers and the Illuminati, it's the puppet show, and it's the illusion, and it's part of the matrix because it's supposed to be happening exactly the way it's supposed to be, and it's all perfect. All is one. Life has purpose. God is love. All is one means everybody is connected together in this beautiful diversity, and that I'm you and you're me, and we all go back to the beginning of time together. I don't think that there's past lives. The reason I don't think that there's past lives is because how many lives have you lived on this planet? Anybody? One. How many lives? One. Very good. The smart guy in the front gets a cookie. One. You know why? Because we were all with God at the beginning, and we've all evolved down through time, and what you've done is you've taken on different aspects, like you've worn different masks as you've gone down through time. We have one life which starts with the Creator in infinity past and goes through to the Creator in the infinity in the future. So we don't live past lives because that empowers that there's some kind of death. Are you guys with me on this? Yeah. So we have past aspects where we get to act and we get to play, and we're the magnificent otters of the universe. We get to do whatever we feel like. Our higher self says, this is what's good for you now. You need to lead this aspect now and that aspect later, and wear this aspect and play this part. I don't think there's any such thing as people talk about old and new souls, right? Oh, you're an old soul. What a bunch of garbage. Hey, what it really is, we're all exactly the same age. There's just a difference between people that pay attention as souls and people that don't. There's dumb souls just like there's smart souls, all right? And as the souls go through time, the old souls have figured things out because they pay attention and learn lifetime through lifetime, and the other souls just come here for the beer, basically. So, chase girls, beer, guys, whatever. So you have aspects to your life, and as the evolution of the planet goes on, this is the remarkable thing about what's going to happen in 2012. 16.5 billion years of evolution is going to be culminated in a 260-day period between February and October 28th of 2011, according to the ending of the Aztec calendar. We run out of time? How much time do we have? We got like 15 minutes? Okay. So to wrap this whole thing up, to give you a perspective of what it is, I know you guys are worried about the economy. I know you guys are worried about your money. You should be, and you should take care of it. You should mind your business and take care of your business, understand. And again, you need to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves, as the saying goes. You need to understand that it's about preaching the gospel and healing the sick, that it's about you, and it's about what you can do every day. My buddy Pete Carroll is the head coach of the USC football team, and I talked to him last night, and he wanted me to give you guys a message. He used to be the head coach of the New England Patriots. He was head coach of the New York Jets. And I said, these people are scared to death. What do I tell them? And Pete just says, first off, tell them it's going to be okay, because it always is. Second off, tell them that the bad guys aren't going to win because they can't. It's just the game's rigged against the forces of evil, if you will. That what's going to happen is that now what you've seen is that as the world tree begins to expand and these thoughts and these powers begin to sweep across the world, that there's not going to be an Orwellian future. There's not a jackboot stamping on a human face for 1,000 years. There's not, that in essence, all of you, for as bright and as brilliant and as magnificent as you are, I can tell you right now, and I'm not saying that this is to abrogate your responsibilities, you don't have to do a thing. Nothing. You know what you have to do? You have to make sure that your antenna, that your satellite dish is polished and bright so you can receive the signal when it comes. You got to wax your board and be sitting out there waiting for the wave to come. You got to paddle like hell when the wave gets there. And are there going to be people that are going to be crushed by the wave? Absolutely. But there's other people that are going to surf that wave because we're on a sea of infinite possibilities, surfing a wave of potential into the shores of realization.
That's right.
So the idea behind all this is that as the world tree expands and contracts, the planet is evolving. Why? Because it has to evolve. We're evolving with the galaxy. The galaxy is evolving along with universal mind. So I'm saying that what you need to do is you're right here, right now, doing exactly what you need to do. The future goes to the curious. Think, therefore I'm dangerous. That's what it has to do. Understand the hypnosis. Understand that it's all a matrix, that it's all energy, that we live, that the generator, operator, destroyer, the God of God, has created a light-encoded reality matrix and has placed inside all of you the SOUL, which is the survival of universal life. And occasionally you stumble into sin, which is a system interference nexus. And when you break your contracts and you break your agreements, you move into a static field which causes disease, which causes challenge, which causes stress, which causes harm. The beauty of Christianity as a religion, let me give you the 3 religions. The beauty of Judaism is it gave us the law. It gave us society. It gave us civilization. It gave us a series of contracts. But it also introduced the concepts of good and bad and dualism. Buddha then comes along. What does Buddha do? Buddha says the essence of the creation is within the self. It's all about self-enlightenment, that God exists and lives within you. But don't forget that if you are the God, the ultimate generator, operator, destroyer, never forget that you are also part of the divine, that you are a drop in a much larger ocean. And at the same time, you have Christ who returns. And if you read the New Testament, like I have several times, and you try to get the essence of what it really is, the essence of Christianity is love thy neighbor as thyself, and the biggest thing about Christianity is forgiveness. That basically the blood of Christ basically picked up the check for the whole table. So, that's a beautiful thing. And when you understand that this forgiveness has now allowed us to break the bonds of debt and karma through those past aspects to free us to serve in the future, that it now brings us towards an energy and a vibration where our psychic powers are going to increase, our healing powers are going to increase, our telepathic powers are going to increase. You know why? Because if you want to be psychic, if you want to heal, all these mystical powers that all these gurus and all these swamis and all these people have, you know why they have those powers? Because if you increase your field of gratitude in the universe and your sense of love, your mystical powers naturally increase. But it's based on love. It's based on loving yourself, based on loving everything around you, and based on loving the fact that you get to live in this magnificent, marvelous, magical universe that we've been placed in, that we are the otters of the cosmos. We can do as we please, but it's all towards our greatest and highest good. And we're moving out of, one last thing, we've moved from the Vedic age. And Ved means knowledge, Ik means the application of knowledge. And in the Vedic age, because we knew, all of us came together and we created a single vibration on the planet where we all thought, what can we do each day that's for the greatest and highest good of every being on the planet, animal, mineral, and vegetable? Do you think we're thinking that now? Anybody? Seriously? And as we move out of that, we took that amazing co-creative power and we moved into the image age, where now we put that energy into stuff. Oh, it's in the tree, or it's in the rock, or it's in the idol, or it's in the Buddha, or it's in the Ganesha, or what have you. Then the priests came along and they built big fences around those things, and we entered the age of the occult. And the age of the occult specifically said everything is hidden, that God's over there, God's outside of you, the creative force. You're not co-creating with the universe because we now control the true powers of the universe, the mysticism. So everything's hidden. They burned the Library of Alexandria. They cut you off from your true nature, which is a star-spanning species that's using this magnificent planet as a college, as a university. And so that occult age is now ending. The definition of apocalypse is not doom and destruction. The definition of apocalypse is that which is hidden becomes revealed. And that's what's going on in the next month or so, in the next couple of months, and as we careen towards 2012 and beyond, going far beyond that, it's not just 2012, what happens when you're suddenly a fully enlightened being? And as a fully enlightened being, you know what that means? That means you stop seeking. And you stop seeking because as a fully enlightened being, the enlightenment comes to you because it means any situation you're in, you can adjust your tone, your feeling, to be able to transform and transmute any situation, any time, and any place. That's true enlightenment. And so after 2012, the energy is we have a new government, there is a new challenge throughout the world, there is more camaraderie with people around the planet, because as you become more psychic and more sensitive, how can you kill somebody when you feel everything that they feel?
You're preaching, brother.
Yeah, there you go. And preach the gospel and heal the sick. So if there's one thing that you can come away with, once again, it's the Mayan core synthesis, which is all is one. We are all linked together. Life has purpose means no matter how messed up things are for you, no matter how many low kicks or dirty tricks or rotten licks you've taken throughout your life, that means that you're exactly at the right place in time, at the right place in space, at the right place in history to be exactly where it is you're supposed to be. And how can you tell when your mission is over? How can you tell that your mission's not over and you got more to do? Because you're not dead. You didn't wake up dead this morning. And last but not least, God is love, which means that the prima mobile of the universe, the first thought of the universe, was for the greatest and highest good for every creation and every being, animal, mineral, vegetable, no matter where that being or that energy or that essence is along that, because we're all part of the one great wave and the one great God. And once again, we will surf into those shores of reality together, and we will all live happily ever after. The end.